Chapter 143. The next morning, Jiang Hai took the girls to the mall and bought them a new set of clothes. Although Jiang Hai was stingy with himself, not that he was stingy, but he really didn't like those upper-class clothes. He was quite generous to others. He bought everyone a new set of clothes and none of them were cheap. The 15 girls who stayed cost Jiang Hai nearly $20,000, which was equivalent to more than $1,000 per person. This was something that the girls couldn't imagine in the past. As the saying goes, clothes make the man and saddle makes the horse. You could tell at first glance that the clothes made the man. Although these girls had some congenital defects, when God closed a door for you, He would always open a window for you. Because these girls didn't have enough to eat all year round, and because they lived in a house, they were all quite thin. The fattest girl was no more than 50 kilograms. Their skin was especially white and tender. Most importantly, those men weren't blind. Since they wanted these girls to do that kind of service, they would definitely look for them. Therefore, when these girls changed into new clothes, they were definitely looking for very beautiful girls. Therefore, when these girls changed into new clothes, they were no longer in the same state as they were yesterday. If it weren't for the inferiority complex they had developed over the years, they would have been models on the catwalk if they had a more confident attitude. Looking at these girls, Jiang Hai couldn't help but stare. To be honest, among these girls, some of them didn't lose to Shite Clive in terms of looks. Of course they didn't win either. Among these girls, the ones that attracted Jiang Hai's attention the most were the twins. After washing up, the two girls were really very beautiful. They had big blue eyes, white skin and golden curly hair. Everything matched the characteristics of blonde beauties. However, they both had small palm-sized faces. Their facial features were delicate and pretty, but they also looked very cute. Especially after changing into the same clothes, even Jiang Hai was stunned. They were indeed a pair of perfect big Lolas. In particular, this pair of big Lolas kept looking at Jiang Hai with pitiful eyes. This made Jiang Hai a little unable to stand it. After changing into the clothes, Jiang Hai treated these people to a big meal. After the meal, the welfare institutions that he had contacted had already sent people to pick up the girls under the age of 18. Although these girls were very reluctant, compared to trusting Jiang Hai, perhaps returning to the welfare institution was a good way out. Especially after they learned that the new welfare institution that Jiang Hai found for them was indeed much better than the previous one, they were also a little tempted. And even if they were unhappy in the welfare institution, they still remembered Jiang Hai's words. When they reached adulthood, they could go to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai would definitely hire them. This was also their way out in the future. After these girls left, 8 of the remaining 10 girls first went to the nearby hospital with Jiang Hai to do a comprehensive physical examination. Since Jiang Hai wanted to hire them, he naturally needed to do a checkup. This was not him being narrow-minded, but he needed to know if his employees' bodies were suitable for employment. After all, they had worked in that kind of work before. Jiang Hai was very afraid that they would carry some untreatable germs. That would be troublesome. Fortunately, these women only had some ordinary trauma diseases in addition to extreme malnutrition and hypoglycemia. The imagined diseases did not exist. Then they went to the lawyer's building of the local welfare institution and signed a labor contract because the nature of their work was different from that of cowboys and fishermen. They did not have these survival skills, so Jiang Hai only let them do some casual work. Their main job was to plant grapes. When it was time to make wine, they naturally had to pick the grapes. Of course, under normal circumstances, they also needed to take care of the vegetables in the manor. Other miscellaneous work was also given to them. Of course, it was within their capabilities. For example, they regularly cleaned some weeds on the ground or cleaned the parking lot. For these jobs, they were still competent. After all, it did not require much skill and it was not very tiring. Jiang Hai gave them $400 a week, which was $2,800 a year. Although it was not much, it was at least much less than their previous income. However, they gained dignity here. Most importantly, they did not need to spend anything. Jiang Hai took care of their food and accommodation. If they did not want to work, they could leave at any time. Jiang Hai would not stop them. Most importantly, the money they earned in the past wouldn't be in their hands. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to live in that place and dress like that. Do you think those 13 men are just decorations? Therefore, when they saw such an agreement, the remaining 8 girls quickly signed it. For them, being able to work in Jiang Hai's manor was like a new life for them. The other terms of the contract were similar. The only difference was that the welfare agency would come down to check on them from time to time. They would check to see if Jiang Hai had abused these special girls, or if something had happened that should not have happened. In the eyes of the welfare agency, although Jiang Hai helped them solve the problem of the 8 girls' jobs. But who knew if Jiang Hai had bad intentions? After all, these 8 girls were very beautiful. In this regard, Jiang Hai could only laugh. He had nothing else to say. After the 8 girls had signed the contract, Jiang Hai specifically called Robbins, who was still in the farm, and asked him and Philemon to drive the remaining 2 cars together. Otherwise they really could not fit so many girls. After finishing the matter, Jiang Hai's 2 F-750 also appeared on the streets of Boston. Although there were many luxury cars on the streets of the United States, the sudden appearance of 3 super pickup trucks still attracted a lot of attention, especially these 10 girls. They originally thought that Jiang Hai's car yesterday was overbearing enough. But today, when they saw the F-750 that was bigger than the F-650, they were shocked again. Some of them carefully climbed into the car. Perhaps they were still afraid of Robbins and Philemon. They did not dare to sit in the front passenger seat but crowded in the back. Robbins and Philemon were also a little speechless about this. Do they look like bad people? Well, these 2 guys really don't look like good people. There were 6 people in the 2 750s, so there were 4 people left. Naturally, they squeezed into Jiang Hai's car. Fortunately, the car was very wide and these girls were not fat, so they could still squeeze in. As for Jiang Hai's front passenger seat, the oldest girl among these girls sat there. In any case, they finally got all of them in. Then Jiang Hai, Robbins, and Philemon got up and brought the remaining 10 girls back to his manor. The 2 girls had not found a place yet, so they came back together. Jiang Hai made an appointment that the people from the Welfare Institute would come to pick up the 2 girls tonight. As for whether the 2 girls would leave or not, he really had no idea. As for Moses Adams, after watching Jiang Hai sign the contract with these girls, he left first. As for him, he did not run away but went to contact the Welfare Institute. Although he was a little uncertain about Jiang Hai's situation. But since Jiang Hai said so, then he needed to do what Jiang Hai said literally. He couldn't really ignore these 2 girls, so he could only bring them back together first. Aphrodite, this is our manor. Not long after, Jiang Hai's motorcade had already seen his manor from afar. Pointing at the huge manor in front of them, Jiang Hai said to the girl beside him. Because he had signed the contract, Jiang Hai also knew the names of these 10 girls. The girl sitting beside him was called Aphrodite Arnold. She was a French girl, 21 years old this year, but was the oldest of these people. When Jiang Hai had asked who would stay, she had been the first to stand up. Although he didn't know her very well, Jiang Hai could tell that she had always been filled with a glimmer of hope for a new life, and Jiang Hai was the catalyst for her hope. It's beautiful. Looking at the snow-white manor in front of her, Aphrodite's big eyes sparkled as she gestured lightly. What's so beautiful about it now? It's all snow. It'll only be beautiful when spring comes. This is a green sea of grass, there's a slender beach road in the middle, and further east is a real ocean. That's what's beautiful. When I first came here, I was also a hothead. They asked for 280 million, so I bought it for 280 million. Now that I think about it, it's really a bit of a loss. Although Jiang Hai didn't know sign language, after a day of contact, he basically knew some things and explained to the girl. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Aphrodite also laughed silently. At this moment she looked like a 21-year-old girl. Aphrodite was full of hope for her new life, and among the 3 girls in the back row, only one of them had similar feelings. This girl was called Janice Joy, one of the people signed by Jiang Hai. She just happened to be 18 years old this year. Her skin wasn't particularly white, but was a very healthy wheat color. She had a head of long brown hair and single eyelids, but her eyes weren't small and were slender. She looked especially flirtatious, but her personality was also very naive. At this moment she was also lying there looking at the scenery outside. This was where she would be working in the future. As for the remaining twins, they were still thinking about it. However, on this day, Jiang Hai didn't completely gain nothing from them. At least he knew their names. The older sister was called Daliana Evelyn, and the younger sister was called Marian Evelyn. Through the understanding of the association, this pair of sisters were the only girls who had been abused in the orphanage. When they were 12 years old, the 2 sisters escaped from the orphanage and were later found by one of the 13 men. Originally, after a few years of recuperation, they would come out to work like the others. However, in order to not let her sister get hurt, Daliana learned how to steal. Every day she stole some money to exchange for food. Just like that, 2 years passed. Chapter 144. Because there are indeed a lot of you and I have to leave 2 rooms for the winemaker, you can only squeeze in for the time being. Jiang Hai returned to his manor with the girls. After parking the car, he took them into the residential area. Of course, when they walked in, they attracted the attention of the people in the manor. After all, they were young and beautiful. It would be strange if the men did not look at them. The fishermen and Philemon were fine since they had families. If they looked at them too much they would be punished. Robbins, Burke Dollar and Edward Anderson were old so they just looked at them. However, Belle and Harriman were somewhat stunned. Even when the girls got off the car, the two of them took the initiative to help the girls carry the toiletries that Jiang Hai bought for them. This action startled the girls. They were still very vigilant towards others so they didn't want Harriman and Belle to touch their things. They would rather carry it themselves. Zhao Hai nodded and said, all right. Harriman and Belle were very hurt by this. Now the only person these girls could trust was probably Jiang Hai. Although Jiang Hai did not show it on his face, he was actually very happy. After driving away Harriman and Belle, who wanted to flatter him, Jiang Hai took them to the back of the villa area. Then Jiang Hai arranged for them to live in 4 small villas in the residential area. There were 16 small villas in Jiang Hai's residential area, which were divided into 3 rows. The first row was Jiang Hai's big villa. Then with Jiang Hai's villa as the starting point, there were 5 small villas in a row. The right side was directly connected to the cowshed. In the middle of each small villa, there was a space to ensure their private world. Then there were 5 villas in the second row and 6 villas in the third row. Now 10 rooms were occupied: Robbins, Burke Dollar, Philemon Turner, Harriman Fells and Belle Lester. Each of them lived in a room in the first row. After all, they were the ones who chose the rooms first. The fishermen recruited by Jiang Hai, led by Edward Anderson, lived in the villas in the second row. Jiang Hai arranged 2 villas for the new girls who lived in the third row. Originally, Jiang Hai didn't need so many people. After all, if it was replaced by some normal men just taking care of the grapes, planting vegetables, doing odd jobs and so on, for people wouldn't be enough. But who told him to pity these girls? It's not crowded. Thank you. After hearing Jiang Hai's arrangement, Aphrodite and the others, who were originally standing behind Jiang Hai, immediately gestured. These villas all had more than 2 rooms. Not to mention individual rooms, even one room was excellent. They had been looking at Jiang Hai's villas just now. To be honest, Jiang Hai's villas were not worse than the villas in the suburbs where the rich lived in the Boston area. Even if they were not as rich as the rich, it would not be a problem for them to be comparable to ordinary white-collar workers. Because when Jiang Hai was decorating these small villas, he bought all the things that he needed to buy. The house had lights, beds, wardrobes, geothermal heat, electrical appliances and so on. Although it could not be compared to Jiang Hai's main villa, it was still very luxurious and comfortable. Jiang Hai had already told them to turn on the geothermal heat in advance. Therefore, when the girls entered the small villa, the temperature had already reached 26 degrees Celsius. It was a very comfortable temperature, at least in the eyes of these girls. You don't have to be too polite with me. After all, you have to work here. If you have any problems in the future, you can come to my main villa to find me at any time. If you encounter any danger, there's a phone in the house. If it's not convenient for you, just press the button. Remember to lock the door. Although the people in my manor should be good people, you must be vigilant. Looking at the nervous girls in front of him, Jiang Hai smiled and said, then continued to introduce them to each other. By the way, can you cook? Don't starve yourselves. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai suddenly asked the girls. Their identities were indeed a little special. It might not be good for them to eat in other people's houses. After all, they were different from him. And he did not have a professional cook here. If they did not know how to cook, it would be troublesome. No need, we all know how to cook. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Aphrodite gestured. After all, they used to live in the orphanage, and the children in the orphanage, except for the very young ones, would be arranged to do some work when they grew a little older. For example, it was very normal for them to help in the kitchen. Therefore, their cooking skills were different. However, they would not starve to death. Seeing that they all knew how to cook, Jiang Hai was relieved. Then he brought these girls to his house. Here, Jiang Hai introduced the pets that the girls gave him. In fact, they were mainly Little White and Little Yellow. This was to prevent the two from accidentally injuring them. When the girls saw the 2 pets, they were very scared, especially Delina and Marion. They had dealt with these dogs a lot in the past. After all, where they lived there were a lot of stray dogs. And these stray dogs were a threat to these people for a long time. However, these 2 dogs were different from those ferocious dogs that would bare their teeth when they saw them. They were very obedient. When Jiang Hai was talking, they just sat there obediently and looked at the girls in front of them with their big eyes. After Jiang Hai's voice fell, they sniffed the girls and then left. After the 2 dogs left, the girls couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Although they didn't know why, the 2 dogs gave them too much pressure. Seeing the girls relaxed, Jiang Hai didn't say much. This was also a test, a show of strength. But now it seems that the effect was good. Then Jiang Hai brought them to the warehouse. When Jiang Hai opened the warehouse, the girls were shocked. In Jiang Hai's cold storage there was a lot of meat hanging. These were the meat that Luo Binsi and the others wanted to eat because their consumption was really high, especially after the 5 fishermen joined. So, every time they killed a cow, Luo Binsi and the others would give the best beef to Jiang Hai. The rest of the beef would be put in the cold storage. Whoever needs to eat it can come and get it, it's convenient. Jiang Hai's house had 3 cold storage, one for frozen meat, one for frozen fish, shrimp and crabs, and one for storing vegetables. Of course, Jiang Hai also had a small warehouse in his villa, which was used to store the good things he liked to eat. In front of the surprised eyes of these girls, Jiang Hai opened the 3 warehouses. Seeing this, the girls' eyes widened even more. As long as you don't waste anything, you can eat as much as you want. As long as you can eat it, you can take it back to eat. You can choose to come and take some every day or take more back. The place where you live also has a refrigerator, but the frozen food is not very delicious. Looking at the performance of the girls, Jiang Hai smiled. The expressions of these girls made him very satisfied. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girls also calmed down. Before coming here, they had already arranged who would live with whom according to their close relationship. At this time, they also sent representatives of each family and walked into the cold storage. Compared to vegetables and seafood, they now prefer to eat meat. After all, the Boston area is close to the sea. The fishing here is abundant all year round, and the price of seafood is not high. As for vegetables, although the vegetables in the United States are also very expensive, the people in the United States don't eat this kind of thing. Compared to other foods, they prefer beef. At most, after taking a lot of beef, they take some vegetables to season it. Jiang Hai watched them take all the food and sent them back to the room where they lived. It's still winter in the next 2 months, so there's no way to grow grapes or vegetables. You should take care of your bodies first. You're too thin now. I want to raise some laborers, not models. Wait until March, when the harvest will start. When Jiang Hai left, the girls breathed a sigh of relief. Then a happy smile appeared on their faces again. Although they had imagined what kind of place Jiang Hai's place would be, they didn't expect it. But they really didn't think that Jiang Hai's place would be so good. There was a warm, comfortable, spacious villa to live in, good beef, fish, shrimp, vegetables to eat, TV to watch, and even their own private space to receive a weekly salary. They didn't have to worry about anything, they didn't have to starve. Compared to where they used to live, this was heaven. After Jiang Hai left, the girls began to get busy. They checked their rooms, every brick, every tile, even the water meter, gas meter, and electricity meter. They carefully looked at it for a long time before they started to cook. Although the cooking wasn't delicious for them, it was the best delicacy. They were full for the first time in many years. Lying on the big bed in the bedroom, many of them fell asleep as soon as they touched the pillow, even though the sun hadn't completely set at this time. As for the leader chosen by the girls, Aphrodite Arnold didn't fall asleep. Instead, she lay on the bed, blinking her big eyes and looking at the white ceiling above her. At this moment, her heart was filled with Jiang Hai. This man had rescued her from that dark world. Towards Jiang Hai, 90% of her heart was filled with gratitude, and the other 10% had some special feelings. At this moment, Jiang Hai didn't know about this. After settling the 8 girls down, Jiang Hai returned to the villa. Looking at the 2 girls in front of him who had yet to find a way out, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smack his teeth. I hope the people from the Welfare Institute will be able to persuade them. Chapter 145. You're here. Please come in. It turned out that whether it was at home or abroad, the effect of government agencies could be improved. Even with Moses Adams's face, 2 staff members from the Boston area's welfare agency came to Jiang Hai's manor when the sky was already a little dark. Under the guidance of Moses Adams, they came to the door of Jiang Hai's villa. After parking the car, a man and a woman got out of the car. Both of them were white. The girl looked like she was in her late 20s. She was very beautiful, but she was not particularly young. The wrinkles next to her nose were deep. She had white skin and brown hair. She looked very American. There was also a man who looked to be in his 30s. He was white. To be exact, in the Boston area, there were not many people of color because in the earliest days, this place was actually a disaster area for racial discrimination. But later, because this was also a metropolitan area and the academic center of the United States, under the intervention of the American government, this place became a key area to rectify discrimination. Today, although the majority of white people in the Boston area were of Irish descent, the discrimination against people of color was gradually disappearing. Except for some old people who still maintained their original views, people in their 30s and 40s had restrained their character. But obviously this guy didn't seem to belong to this group, because when he saw Jiang Hai, he couldn't help but frown. Originally, he thought that since this manor was so big, the owner here would probably be a kind old white man, but he didn't expect it to be a yellow young man. This made him reduce Jiang Hai's score in his heart. Jiang Hai didn't care about this. They could see him as they liked, but they couldn't show it. Jiang Hai was quite a narrow-minded person. If these guys dared to show off in front of him, he would not let them go easily. Hello, my name is Kelly Marie. This is my colleague Carlos Barron. We are here to pick up the girls. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the woman couldn't help but smile and greet him. The man nodded and then entered the room under Jiang Hai's signal. As soon as they entered the room, they saw the Evelyn sisters sitting on the sofa watching TV. When the sisters saw the two strangers coming in, they instantly became alert. Hello, my name is Kelly. You can call me Big Sister Kelly. I'm here to pick you up. Seeing the vigilance in the eyes of the two girls, the woman gestured as she walked in front of the two girls and looked at them. Unfortunately, even though she had a smile on her face, the two girls tried their best to shrink back, unwilling to get close to her. Seeing the vigilant look of the two girls, the woman also sighed. It seemed that it was not going to be easy. You don't have to be afraid. I don't mean any harm. You can't always stay in someone else's house. You will disturb him. Looking at the two girls, the woman continued to gesture. No, we won't leave. We want to stay here. We can work in exchange for food. Seeing the woman's gesture, the elder sister Daliana Evelyn's immediately followed. No, you can't. You are still too young. If he hires you, it will actually harm him. Do you understand? But before she finished her gesture, the woman had already interrupted her and said to them with a serious face. But after hearing her words, the two girls were still unmoved. They just shrank back, shook their heads and waved their hands. They were unwilling to leave no matter what. The woman continued to persuade them, but the two girls were determined. Jiang Hai and the others stood there for half an hour. During this time, the woman tried to persuade them, but it was to no avail. The two girls were determined not to go with them. At this time, the man who was standing behind them couldn't bear it anymore. He walked in front of the woman and reached out to grab the two girls. At the same time he said, Sister, you're not going to go with me. At the same time he said, Don't talk nonsense with them. Just take them away. These two girls are determined to stay here. You can't persuade them to leave. When his voice fell, the man had already grabbed the two girls' arms. The woman beside him, Kelly, was hesitating whether she should do this or not. But judging from the current situation, it seemed that she didn't have much choice. If they didn't take them away by force, they would probably return empty-handed today. These two girls had been malnourished for many years. Their bodies were so thin that they were almost like a layer of skin wrapped around bones. Being pulled off the sofa by this man, the younger sister, Marian Eveline, was almost scared out of her wits. She just struggled hard and didn't want to be pulled away by this man. On the other side, her elder sister, Daliana Eveline, was struggling hard. She even forcefully hit this man's arm. However, it was a pity that her strength wasn't enough to move this man. Seeing this guy's rude actions, Jiang Hai subconsciously became angry. He stepped forward to stop this scene, but just as he took a step forward, he was stopped by Moses Adams beside him. If you don't want them to stay, then you can only watch them leave. Moses Adams looked at Jiang Hai and said seriously. After all, at this moment, this man just pulled and didn't do anything else. If Jiang Hai made a sound now, it would be really troublesome. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but stop. His eyes were a bit hesitant. He was born to be indecisive and didn't have his own opinion. Of course, once he decided on something, he would follow it to the end. But now, for him, these two girls were really troublesome. Moreover, he was not qualified to deal with them. "Ah, stinky girl, how dare you bite me?" While Jiang Hai was hesitating, Daliana had already rushed to the man's side. She knew that it was impossible for her to beat this man or pull off his hand with her own strength. Therefore, she used her strongest weapon, her mouth, to bite this man's arm. Under the pain, the man couldn't help loosening his grip on the two sisters. Looking at the blood on his arm, this man was also furious. Looking at Daliana, who was still stubbornly raising her head in front of him, this man didn't think too much. He raised his right hand and slapped towards Daliana's face. Looking at the approaching slap, Daliana was startled. She immediately closed her eyes and shrunk her head into her body. However, even so, she didn't step back. Instead, she still stood there tenaciously to show her determination. Hoo! The slap brought along a gust of wind towards her face, but after the gust of wind passed, she didn't feel any pain even after waiting for a long time. Liana couldn't help but feel a little strange. When she opened her eyes, she discovered that the slap had stopped less than 5 centimeters away from her. The slap was still the same one, but on the man's wrist, there was a hand that wasn't very big but firmly grasped there. The huge force caused the man's hand to continuously tremble, and his face was also flushed red from suffocation. Needless to say, the owner of this hand was obvious. The only person here who had the ability to block this attack was Jiang Hai. Is this how you deal with these kids? Looking at this man in front of him, Jiang Hai's voice was a bit cold. If it weren't for him today, this kid would have been beaten up. Looking at the two girls who were curled up like kittens in front of him, Jiang Hai's heart was burning with anger. F***ck yellow man, you're not a good person either. Since you've decided to send them to the welfare organization, they have nothing to do with you. Don't think that I don't know what you're planning to do by hiring so many deaf and mute girls. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man grinned and roared angrily. But fortunately, after he said the word yellow, he took back his words. Otherwise, Jiang Hai would have directly made him unable to speak the rest of his words. But now what he said shocked Jiang Hai. In all honesty, when he brought these girls here, he really didn't have the slightest bit of dirty thoughts. He just pitied these girls and wanted to find a way out for them. However, this guy's words made Jiang Hai quite unhappy. At that time, Jiang Hai's hand gradually increased in strength. At the same time, Jiang Hai tried to break the guy's hand. But this guy couldn't break free from Jiang Hai's grip. Jiang Hai's expression changed. The huge pain made him a little confused. At that time he kicked Jiang Hai without thinking, but Jiang Hai was faster. He kicked back and the man's leg was crooked. Then the huge pain and the soreness in his leg made him kneel on the ground. Looking at Jiang Hai's murderous gaze, he had no other choice but to scream. Please stop. Mr. Jiang, calm down. Seeing this scene, Kelly and Moses Adams on the other side immediately shouted at Jiang Hai. Hearing their words, Jiang Hai's original anger gradually subsided. When he let go of his hand, he kicked out. It happened to kick this guy in the chest and send him flying. Fortunately, Jiang Hai didn't use all his strength, but the kick still made the man vomit on the ground for a long time. Mister, don't you think you went a little overboard? The woman immediately ran over and checked her colleague's injuries. Although he didn't suffer any internal injuries and didn't have any broken bones, it was obvious that Jiang Hai had taught him a lesson, especially his right hand. At this time, Jiang Hai had pinched his wrist until it was purple and black. She estimated that it would take at least 10 days to half a month to recover. Although there was no fatal injury, it still made the woman very angry. She stood up and said to Jiang Hai, "Overboard? Why didn't you say anything when he was about to hit them? Or are you used to treating these girls like this?" Hearing the woman's words, Jiang Hai raised his eyebrows and shouted at the woman. Chapter 146. Carlos is just in a hurry to take them away. Besides, isn't this the result you want? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the woman couldn't help but be speechless. But never use the word reason to measure a woman's mind. Obviously, at this time she couldn't win against Jiang Hai by talking about the previous topic, so she wisely chose another topic. I don't want to talk to you anymore. These two girls won't leave. Hearing the woman's words, Jiang Hai snorted coldly, then turned his head and looked at the two girls who were as pitiful as injured kittens, but still stubbornly raised their heads. Jiang Hai originally wanted to send them away, but unconsciously he gave up the idea. If it really doesn't work, I'll take them in. Although he also felt that it was a little inconvenient, it was better to stay with him than to let them be bullied outside. At least he wouldn't have any bad thoughts about them. I will contact your welfare agency. Please go ahead. Hearing that Jiang Hai had made up his mind to adopt these two girls, Moses Adams shrugged, although he felt that Jiang Hai was taking off his pants to fart and wasting his time. But since it was Jiang Hai's decision, then as a lawyer he had to clean up after Jiang Hai. This was his job. After hearing Moses Adams say this, the two people from the welfare agency looked at each other and finally turned to leave. Hearing the sound of the two people driving away, Jiang Hai sighed. He couldn't take care of himself. Now there were two more burdens. Looking at the two little girls standing in front of him, Jiang Hai smiled bitterly. You guys, you win. Come and eat with me. Jiang Hai nodded the heads of the two girls. Perhaps they knew that Jiang Hai wasn't going to drive them away again. The corners of the two girls' mouths couldn't help but grin. Their two big eyes were smiling like crescent moons, which was particularly cute. Jiang Hai didn't know whether it was right or wrong to take them in, but the most important thing was that this was his heart. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, The two girls knew that since Jiang Hai said that he wanted to keep them, he wouldn't lie to them. So they went back, picked up the coats that Jiang Hai bought for them and put them on again. Just now, Jiang Hai said that he would go to Mrs. Philemon's place to eat every day. Since they were going to live here in the future, there would probably be 2 more people coming over to eat. However, they also thought that this was what they should do. Since Jiang Hai had decided to let them stay, then in the future the problem of eating Jiang Hai's meals, cleaning the house, washing clothes, and even warming the bed would naturally be their job. Now the first thing they had to do was to learn how to cook as soon as possible. Jiang Hai didn't know what these 2 little girls were thinking about. After putting on the coats, Moses Adams also came back. After informing Jiang Hai, he didn't follow Jiang Hai to eat. Instead he went back first. Tomorrow he would go to help Jiang Hai with the adoption documents and so on. These things naturally had to be done by him as a lawyer. As for why he didn't eat, Jiang Hai didn't ask him to stay. Instead he sent $1,000 to his account. This was also the fee for his hard work today. The other lawyers' fees were calculated separately. This was to make up for his meal. After receiving the text message, Moses Adams didn't refuse. After all, he was helping Jiang Hai mainly for the money. There was no need for him to refuse the boss's money. If you want a horse to run, you have to feed it. Jiang Hai knew this very well. After Moses Adams left, Jiang Hai took the 2 girls to Mrs. Philemon's house. When Mrs. Philemon came back, she didn't go to the cowshed. She was still watching TV in the living room. Seeing Jiang Hai bring the 2 girls over, she was a little surprised. "Boss, didn't you say you would send them to the orphanage?" When they were in Boston, Philemon had asked what to do with the girls after they were sent back to the manor. The 8 girls were already adults, so they could be hired as employees. These girls came from poor backgrounds. Now that they had the opportunity to live a stable life, they would probably be good employees. However, these 2 girls couldn't be. In the United States, it was illegal to hire child labor and illegal labor. Among them, illegal labor wasn't a big deal, but child labor wasn't a small matter. Therefore, Philemon was a little uncertain about Jiang Hai's thoughts regarding these 2 girls. Just now the people from the orphanage came. They were really rude and even wanted to beat them. Although I know that this kind of thing is inevitable everywhere, but so I decided to adopt them. Anyway, my place is very big and I don't have anyone to talk to. They can accompany me here. I also need to find a school for them. Sitting next to Philemon, Jiang Hai rubbed his temples in distress. Looking at the 2 beautiful sisters standing next to him, he really didn't know what to say. "Boss, sometimes your heart is too kind." But this is also good. With a kind boss, our lives will be much better." Philemon laughed after hearing Jiang Hai's words. "Mrs. Turner, I'll have to trouble you to cook for 2 more people in the future. Do you want me to give you a raise?" At this moment, Mrs. Philemon, who had been busy, came out of the kitchen. Looking at the tanned and plump woman, Jiang Hai said with a smile, "What raise? The money you give me is to cook 3 meals a day. In the end, you don't eat at my place for at least 2 meals a day. I originally wanted to ask you to lower my salary, but now I have a job again." Mrs. Philemon laughed heartily after hearing Jiang Hai's words. She walked to the fridge next to her and prepared to get some food. After hearing Mrs. Philemon's words, the 2 girls who had been standing next to her exchanged glances with each other. Then they quickly walked to the fridge and helped Mrs. Philemon pick up the food. Mrs. Philemon originally didn't want them to work. After all, if Jiang Hai helped them, then at least in name they would be Jiang Hai's daughters. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were their own little bosses. How could they let their boss work for them? But when she saw the desire in the eyes of the 2 girls, she couldn't help but be taken aback. Then she took out the beef in her hand and handed it to the 2 girls. She knew that the 2 girls wanted to show off and prove that they weren't completely useless. To be honest, Mrs. Philemon's thoughts toward the 8 women were complicated. She felt pity, puzzlement, and vigilance. The people of the United States, or to be exact, the people of Europe and America, were basically like this. They weren't willing to interfere with the lives of others. Regardless of whether they were living well or not, it would make people feel that they were somewhat cold-blooded. But this was their life policy and way of dealing with people. Perhaps when they saw something that moved them or made them feel pity, they would give some monetary help. But other than money, they wouldn't give anything else. For example, they wouldn't casually let stray cats and dogs into their rooms, nor would they take in homeless people on the street. It was not that they were cold-blooded. After all, no one was willing to change their lives because of some trivial matters. Even in China there were many such people. As the old saying went, when the father dies and the mother marries, everyone takes care of themselves. How could there be so much kindness? This was the origin of their pity and confusion. They couldn't understand why Jiang Hai brought them back. Based on their understanding of Jiang Hai, he didn't seem to have the intention of keeping the 8 girls at home. As for their vigilance, it was because they had also heard about the origin of these women. They didn't have proper jobs in the past. Although their backgrounds were somewhat pitiful, they were still employed in that kind of profession. It was already good enough that ordinary housewives didn't look at them with hostility. But it could be foreseen that these women would look at their husbands with unprecedented intensity. However, such complicated thoughts were mainly directed toward the 8 women. Daliana and Marian were obviously not among them. Mrs. Philemon was quite fond of the 2 girls, so she brought them into the kitchen. Seeing this scene, although Jiang Hai wanted to say something, he didn't. This was because he didn't know how he felt about the 2 girls. Now he felt pity for them, but when he thought about living with them in the future, Jiang Hai. After waiting for a long time, a very Boston-style dinner began. Although Daliana and Marian ate well yesterday and today, their hearts were actually hanging in the air because they didn't want to go back to the orphanage. And Jiang Hai insisted on sending them back, which made them very afraid, so they didn't eat properly during the meal. This time the 2 girls were finally relieved and they ate freely. Jiang Hai was stunned when he saw this. Thinking about it, they hadn't eaten such delicious beef, fish and soup for a long time. If it weren't for the fact that he was afraid that they would eat too much, Jiang Hai estimated that they could eat for the whole night. After eating, although the 2 girls were full, they still stood up and helped Mrs. Philemon clean up the dishes. After everything was done, Jiang Hai took them back to his villa. Jiang Hai's villa was very large. Usually there were only 5 living creatures in it: Jiang Hai, Goldie, Xiaobai, Dai Teeth and Chirps. Chirps had been captured for a long time, but it hadn't grown up yet. Although it didn't look like a bald chicken, its range of activity was still limited to Jiang Hai's room. As for Dai Teeth, Goldie and Xiaobai, they were running around. When Jiang Hai came back with the 2 girls, the 3 little guys also greeted them. They also had an impression of the 2 little girls, but although they were enthusiastic, the 2 girls had a natural fear of dogs. Okay, you guys go play by yourselves. Don't scare them. They will be our family in the future. After kicking the 2 dogs' butts, Jiang Hai chased them aside and said with a smile. The 2 dogs heard Jiang Hai's words and looked at each other. Chapter 147. Perhaps with their IQ, it was difficult for them to understand what family was, but they also understood that there would be 2 more people to please in the future. Therefore, after wagging their tails at the 2 girls, they lay down and played in the distance. As for Jiang Hai, he took the 2 girls upstairs. In the future, since you're going to stay here, come and take a look at your rooms. This is my room, the master bedroom. Your rooms are next to mine. These 4 guest bedrooms have all been renovated. You can go and choose which one to use as your room. As they walked to the 2nd floor, Jiang Hai introduced them. When they reached the 2nd floor, Jiang Hai saw that the door of his room was open. Needless to say, this was the masterpiece of Dai Teeth. Usually Jiang Hai and his 4 pets always lived together, and only Dai Teeth knew how to open the door. Since Dai Teeth learned this skill, the 2 dogs didn't need Jiang Hai to open the door for them to go to the toilet every morning. Otherwise, do you think Xiaobai would be so kind to let Dai Teeth sit on her head? But a single man's room? Even if the 4 pets were more obedient and there was no strange smell in the room, there would naturally be a lot of garbage. As soon as they went upstairs, they saw that on the big bed, there was an unfolded quilt, and the curtains were not open. The open door had a lot of clothes, socks and even underwear piled up. Although Jiang Hai was not obsessed with cleanliness, it was inevitable to change underwear every day. A man's underwear was easy to smell, and Jiang Hai was still a single man. Cough cough, it was a bit off topic. But as soon as they went upstairs, Jiang Hai blushed because his room was indeed a bit too messy. After pretending to walk over and close the door, Jiang Hai pointed to the 4 rooms next to the girls. These were the 4 guest rooms, but now they were going to be the 2 girls' rooms. After Daliana and Marian looked at each other, they pushed open the doors of the rooms next to them and looked inside. Jiang Hai hadn't entered these 4 rooms since the renovation, but sometimes when he asked the housekeeper to clean up his room, they would also clean up the guest rooms, so there was no strange smell and dust in the room. When they pushed open the door, the 2 girls' mouths turned into an O shape in surprise. They originally thought that the place they lived in would be similar to the place where Aphrodite lived, but they were obviously wrong. Jiang Hai's guest rooms were completely incomparable to the bedrooms of small villas. The spacious room had a big bed, a separate bathroom and a small living room. The room had already been set up with a network cable, a variety of appliances, televisions, air conditioners and so on. This room was even a room to live here. The decorations were no worse than a hotel suite. In fact, it was even better. Thinking that this would be their home in the future, the two girls didn't dare to step in. What? Not satisfied? If there's anything you're not satisfied with, just say it, write it down, and then I'll ask you to renovate it, but before that you have to live here. Seeing the two girls hesitating, Jiang Hai said with a smile. No, I'm very satisfied, that's great. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two girls also gestured one after another. Looking at the movements of the two girls, Jiang Hai smiled. Although he didn't know why, Jiang Hai felt that if the two girls could speak, their voices should be very pleasant to hear. Suddenly he remembered something. He didn't know if his blood would be useful. Just as Jiang Hai was pondering, the two girls had walked into the room quietly, looking around, touching here and there for fear of breaking anything. If they hadn't accidentally turned on the TV, Jiang Hai might still be thinking. Seeing the two girls satisfied with the room, Jiang Hai also walked in. The other 3 guest rooms are similar to this one. You can choose one. Who will live here and who will live in the other rooms? Looking at the two girls, Jiang Hai said with a smile, but when they heard Jiang Hai's words, the two girls shook their heads. They had never been separated since they were young, so now they were not going to live separately. Looking at their decision, Jiang Hai persuaded them. Seeing that they were really not just being polite, Jiang Hai didn't care. After giving them the key to the room and helping them get the quilt to cover them at night, Jiang Hai left. Returning to his room, Jiang Hai stood in front of the window and looked at the dark sky outside. He couldn't help but pat his face. Really, how can I be inexplicably soft-hearted? Muttering in a low voice, Jiang Hai didn't intend to take care of these people, but why did he suddenly fall ill? In the end, not only did he recruit 8 women as workers, but he also adopted 2 godchildren. He even had 2 goddaughters. How could it be so easy to get a goddaughter? Now that he thought about it, he felt a headache. He was still a child who hadn't grown up. Well, in fact, he thought that he hadn't grown up. But in any case, since Jiang Hai said that he would adopt them, Jiang Hai would not go back on his words. Although he wouldn't go back on his words, at least he wouldn't easily go back on his words. Don't think about it. Since I have decided, that's it. But there are still 2 questions. Hasn't Qi signed yet? What does she want to do? Also, think about it, when will I go back in February? Fu Yuan said that he will come over during the Chinese New Year. I will come back with him then. Touching the stubble that had just grown on his chin, Jiang Hai whispered in Chinese. He really didn't expect Qi reaction. He originally thought that Qi would also want to get rid of him as soon as possible. After all, he knew that Qi had a boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, although that guy was quite bad. But women, emotions would always prevail over reason. What's more, she was about to marry that man at one time. Moreover, she was a woman. It was useless for her to keep such a big family business. She would get married and have children sooner or later. Maybe in a few years she would get involved with that man again. The reason why Jiang Hai thought so was not without reason. After all, he was Qi legal husband, but the two had been married for more than a year. Not to mention doing other things, they didn't even see each other more than one hand. At first he was jealous and annoyed. He would also call Qi to fight for something, but later he understood. In Qi heart there was no him at all. The two were not people living in the same world at all. Perhaps the intersection of worlds would create some intersection points, but as far as he was concerned, those intersection points were just illusions. Therefore, Jiang Hai didn't care about what Qi thought in her heart. A long time ago he wanted to end this wrong marriage and start over. Finally he was successful now. He was now a rich man and his life had nothing to do with Qi. If it wasn't because of this incident, he might have forgotten about this woman. Knock, knock, knock. Just as Jiang Hai was thinking about something, a series of knocks sounded from the door. Then Jiang Hai looked back and found that Deliana had already arrived in front of Jiang Hai's room. Because Jiang Hai's villa was geothermal 24 hours a day. So it was very warm here, so Deliana didn't wear anything at this time. Her slender body was wrapped in a bath towel, and her hair was still a little wet. It looked like she had just washed her hair. Her small feet stepped on Jiang Hai's carpet. At this time she was standing at the door looking at Jiang Hai timidly. "Oh, what's the matter? Why did you come here?" Looking at the girl in front of him, Jiang Hai's eyes flashed with a trace of panic, but he still slowed down his voice and asked her. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Deliana hesitated for a moment and took off the bath towel wrapped around her body. The scenery that Jiang Hai saw last night appeared in front of him again. Jiang Hai also understood her meaning from her eyes. She was sacrificing herself? Seeing this, Jiang Hai's face instantly turned ugly. He sighed and walked in front of Deliana. Seeing Jiang Hai walking over, Deliana's breathing became heavier. She subconsciously wanted to step back, but she stopped and slowly closed her eyes. She wasn't an ordinary girl who stayed at home all the time. She had seen too many men and women, so she vaguely knew what a man would do after seeing such a girl. She did this because she wanted to exchange her body for a stable and warm home. She didn't regret it at all. But unfortunately, Jiang Hai was not as bad as she had imagined, nor as despicable as she had imagined. After walking in front of Deliana, Jiang Hai admitted that this girl was indeed a beauty. She had big eyes, long eyelashes and golden hair. Because it needed to be cut very short, it only reached her ears and was naturally buttoned inwards. Her face alone was enough to cause the downfall of a country, but according to Jiang Hai's score she could be rated 80 points. However, Jiang Hai wanted to have a daughter, not a lover. So he just bent down, picked up the bath towel and wrapped it around her body. Deliana, hearing Jiang Hai's words and feeling the bath towel wrapped around her body, Deliana opened her eyes again. Remember, I didn't keep you here because of my desire, your body, or my guilt. You are my daughter here. Of course, you can also treat me as your friend, but we don't need to use our bodies. We only need to communicate with each other through our minds. Do you understand? I hope this is the last time, understand. A pair of black eyes stared at the blue eyes in front of her. Jiang Hai's words entered the girl's ears word by word. Sometimes tears were so unbearable. Originally, the girl was stubborn even when she was caught and was about to be beaten. But after hearing Jiang Hai's words, her tear ducts unconsciously developed. Big drops of tears rolled down from her eyes and fell on Jiang Hai's carpet. Looking at Jiang Hai's serious face, Deliana nodded seriously and then threw herself into Jiang Hai's arms. Touching the girl's hair in front of him, Jiang Hai laughed at himself. It seemed that he was also changing. Chapter 148. What happened that night was just a small episode in Jiang Hai's life. When he woke up the next day, he felt that he had to adapt to his new life. When he got up, the two little ones were still asleep, so he decided to do some morning exercises before coming back to cook for them. In the end, when he returned, he found that the two little ones had woken up at some point in time. Not only did they tidy up the room, cook, and even wash the clothes. In fact, the most important thing was Jiang Hai's clothes, socks, and underwear. Looking at the underwear hanging in the bathroom on the first floor, Jiang Hai's face couldn't help but twitch. He felt a little embarrassed. However, he still accepted the girl's kindness. Perhaps in their eyes, they were troubling Jiang Hai here because they had to do something for Jiang Hai. It was not bad to deal with some housework. After breakfast, Jiang Hai took the two little ones and the 8 girls to the town of Winthrop. He gave the 8 girls a month's salary in advance. After all, they also needed to buy things. Jiang Hai wanted them to be independent and they were very willing to do so. At the same time, when they learned that the two little ones had become Jiang Hai's daughters, they were also very surprised and envious. After all, they were still workers, but their daughters were different. After shopping in Winthrop for a day, each of them bought at least 3 sets of clothes to change into. Including the one given by Jiang Hai, they had bought 4 sets of clothes, including underwear. Although Jiang Hai didn't know much about underwear, these women more or less knew a thing or two. In addition to clothes, they also bought toothbrushes, toothpaste, towels, and so on. Naturally, Delina and Marion did the same. These girls might have laughed the most in the past few years, and it was also the most comfortable day for them. They shopped for a whole day. In the evening, Jiang Hai invited them to have dinner in the Italian restaurant in Winthrop before taking them back to the manor. Compared to these girls, Delina and Marion gained more things today. Not only did they have new clothes, new pajamas, and toiletries, but Jiang Hai also bought them 2 computers. Girls were different from boys. If Jiang Hai bought a computer or a laptop, it would definitely be an alien or a Thor or a human from the future who would use a laptop as a top PC. However, Delina and Marion didn't know how to choose these things. In the end, they chose 2 3-star computers. Well, in terms of beauty, Samsung and Apple were still the best. However, Apple's computers were not ultra-thin, while Samsung's computers were not. After buying all the things, Jiang Hai and the others completed their task for the day. The next day, Jiang Hai continued to go out to sea. After all, he still had work to do. When he went out to sea, naturally he was teased by the old fishermen for a long time. But Jiang Hai also gave them a warning. These girls were his employees, so these people shouldn't have any thoughts that they shouldn't have. When they heard Jiang Hai's words, these people's faces became sullen. Obviously, Jiang Hai was not the only one who had such thoughts. Their wives also had the same thoughts. Except for Edward Anderson, in these days when these men went to the toilet for a long time at night, their wives would knock on the door to make sure that they were inside. Hearing this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. It seemed that getting married too early was not a good thing. Although these people had bad luck at home, they were still very lucky outside, especially in the fishery. Also, after Jiang Hai used Big Dumb to drive away the fish, their catch was rapidly increasing. 5 consecutive days, Jiang Hai and the others went out to sea, and the fish they caught in these 5 days were sold for more than $600,000. This was not including the food that Jiang Hai kept for himself. Naturally, in these days Jiang Hai also gave out a lot of bonuses. Almost everyone received more than $10,000 in bonuses. They were very happy with this generous boss and worked more seriously. On the 4th day, Moses Adams came to Jiang Hai and gave Jiang Hai the certificate of adoption of the 2 girls. In fact, Jiang Hai was 27 years old. At least, he was still single in the United States. Whether he was married or not, it was impossible for him to adopt 2 14-year-old girls. However, there was a saying that money could make the devil push the millstone. When money and connections reached a certain level, even the millstone could make the devil push the devil, let alone the devil. Jiang Hai was in such a state at the moment. He had spent $200,000 on the adoption certificate. Once the $200,000 were thrown in, the welfare agencies that had been insistent decided to turn a blind eye to it. Who said that overseas was absolutely clean. If you paid them to commit fraud and break the law, they might not do it. But if it was just for them to turn a blind eye, they would be more than happy to do so. Just like that, Delina Iveline and Marion Iveline officially became Jiang Hai's daughters. Then Jiang Hai called Sh20 Clive and invited her to the manor for dinner. He also told her about sending the 2 girls to school. However, Sh20 Clive was in a bit of a dilemma, although she agreed with Jiang Hai's approach. The problem was that there was no school for the deaf in Winthrop. Although there was one in Boston, it was too far away and they had to live in the school. Now, the 2 girls were extremely dependent on Jiang Hai and were unwilling to leave Jiang Hai to live in the school. If they went to an ordinary school, they would easily be discriminated against and bullied. This was also something that Jiang Hai could not control. Most importantly, they had lived in the Welfare Institute since they were young. Although the 2 girls also studied there, the basic volunteers were only there for basic education. However, the volunteers at the Welfare Institute only taught them the most basic things. They were only at the level of a 3rd or 4th grader. The only difference was that they could recognize all the words. Under such circumstances, if they were to go to secondary school, they wouldn't be able to catch up. If they went to primary school, not to mention them, even Jiang Hai felt a little ashamed. So after thinking about it, the only way might be to find a tutor to teach them first. Fortunately, the learning atmosphere in the United States was extremely free. Even if they were self-taught at home, they could still take part in some school exams and get a review or something like that. It was just that they would not be given a normal grade. Jiang Hai was also relieved about this. After learning that Jiang Hai was going to hire a tutor, Sh20 Clive volunteered and said that she could come over on Saturday and Sunday to tutor the 2 sisters. Jiang Hai was also very grateful. But the 2 sisters were not very interested in Sh20 Clive, especially when they saw that she seemed to be quite close to Jiang Hai. However, in any case, the problem of the 2 sisters going to school was finally solved. Jiang Hai can now concentrate on fishing in his own fishing ground. Because the fish in the coral reef are not moving, he can only catch the fish in the sand, and with the help of Dasha he can drive them away. The progress was quite fast. According to Edward Anderson's research and estimation, the total value of all the fish in Jiang Hai's fish farm was about $8 million. The fish in the coral reefs accounted for about 60% of the total value. Because Jiang Hai was not willing to destroy the coral reefs, the 60% was not touched, which meant that 8 million of the 8 million were not touched. Of the remaining 2 million, about 5 million were seabed fish, which were sea cucumbers, sea urchins, crabs, lobsters and the like. Although Jiang Hai would catch some every time he went out to sea, he did not catch too many. Therefore these things were basically left over. Only 7 million of the fish needed to be caught, but they still needed to maintain the ecological balance. Leaving 20% meant that he needed to catch about 4 million fish. These fish needed to be caught because they would not be eaten up by these fish when they were harvesting the seeds of the wine seaweed. In the blink of an eye, it was already late January. Jiang Hai's income from pure fish sales had reached his initial expectations. There were even some unexpected gains, such as the blue marlin caught at the beginning. Although such good things did not happen again, Jiang Hai's fish were the best in this sea area. Of course, there were also many people eyeing Jiang Hai's fish farm. Some people even said that they wanted to buy Jiang Hai's fish farm. Jiang Hai was very generous. He would pay them 1.5 billion in cash in one lump sum, and the fish farm and manor would be given to them. Then, There was no then. In other people's eyes, Jiang Hai must be crazy. You bought it for 280 million a few months ago and now you want to sell it for 1.5 billion a few months later. Who would be crazy enough to buy it? In this regard, Jiang Hai could only shrug, because even if he said that his 20,000 cows were worth 1 billion, no one would believe him. In this way time slowly passed and it was finally time to scatter the seaweed seeds. Early this morning Jiang Hai was woken up by the doorbell. When he went over to take a look he saw that it was also an acquaintance. The black man who sold his fish seedlings, Porter and Eva. In addition to him there was also a white man. Jiang Hai also knew this white man. It was the boss who sold seaweed and seaweed seeds that Porter and Eva met. Hey, you guys came early enough. After opening the door to let the car of the two people in, Jiang Hai also changed his clothes, walked out of the house with a glass of milk, and looked at the two who were chatting with Ai Dehua and others who got up early in the parking lot. This is business. Of course we have to be early. We can't let the customers wait for us, right? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Iron Bull Porter and Eva, who had a good temper with him, revealed his big white teeth and laughed heartily. Well man, you're right, no wonder your business is getting bigger and bigger, but man, I only see you guys, where are my seeds? Shrugging, Jiang Hai said noncommittally. This kind of attitude is really good for business. Mr. Jiang Hai, you didn't build an airport here, so I put the seeds in Winthrop. When you are ready, you can fly over at any time to scatter them. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the white man here also said with a smile. Chapter 149. Using a plane to scatter seeds of seaweed and seaweed was not as easy as one would imagine. In fact, this was a rather troublesome matter. First, Edward would go with them to see if there were any problems with this batch of seaweed seeds. Then the others would sail over and throw down some kind of smoke bomb at the place where the seeds needed to be scattered. This kind of smoke bomb was very common. Its most common use was to float on the sea and emit thick smoke. Generally, planes would have this kind of thing so that if the plane was forced to land in the sea, the people who escaped from the plane could use this thing to locate them. But now, Jiang Hai and the others used this thing to mark the location of the wine seaweed seeds. If this thing was scattered too far away, it would not be in Jiang Hai's territory. If it was scattered too close, it would be scattered on the coral reef. Then it would be good if 1 in 10 of these seaweed seeds could germinate and become a delicacy for the fish there. Therefore, the selection of the location was also very particular. Fortunately, the fishermen hired by Jiang Hai were all old fishermen. These days, while they were fishing, they also checked the distribution of fish below the sea area. They were still very considerate about the location of the seaweed seeds. After exchanging a few words with Jiang Hai, everyone set off. Edward followed them to the airport in Winthrop. As for Tommy Charles, Enoch Cece, Andrew Christian, and Marin Rupert, they all drove Jiang Hai's motorboats and went into the sea with smoke bombs. As for Jiang Hai, since he had nothing to do, he was also going to take a look. You haven't been to the sea with me yet, do you want to go and take a look? Jiang Hai glanced at Daliana and Marian behind him, who were still confused about the situation, and asked them. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two girls nodded happily. Hey Marin, wait for us, let's go and take a look. Since the two girls were willing to go, Jiang Hai was not polite and directly said to Marin Rupert, who had not left yet. Then you should wear more clothes, boss. At least give them more clothes. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Marin Rupert, who usually doesn't like to talk, pointed to their clothes and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai immediately took the two girls upstairs to change into thicker clothes that could block the wind. After all, it was the coldest time of the year. It didn't matter if he was in good health, but the two sisters were not in good health. These days they had been nourished by delicious food every day. In addition, there were a lot of fitness equipment in Jiang Hai's room. As a result, the two girls' bodies were no longer just skin and bones like when they first met. They now had some fat and muscles. But even so, it was impossible for them to withstand the cold wind outside. After Jiang Hai specially armed them, the three of them left the villa and drove a modified all-terrain vehicle in the direction of the dock. When they arrived, Tommy and the others were almost ready. In the beginning, Jiang Hai bought a total of 3 boats and a fishing boat. Now, it was just right for these 4 people to drive. Tommy Charles, Eleanor Cece, and Andrew Christian. These 3 people drove the boat and were almost ready. When Jiang Hai arrived, they were ready to set off. After greeting Jiang Hai, they drove the boat, broke through the layers of waves and headed into the distance. As for Jiang Hai, he took the 2 girls and stepped on the fishing boat driven by Marin Rupert. Boss, just sit in the cabin. When we arrive, we can go and look at the plate armor. After boarding the boat, Marin Rupert said to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also agreed. He didn't have the leisure to go and look at the plate armor now. The wind outside was very cold. Instead of freezing outside, it was better to stay in the cabin and drink some drinks. However, compared to Jiang Hai, who had been to the sea many times, Delina and Marian were more interested in the outside world. After these days of getting along, Jiang Hai also had some grasp of the characters of these two girls. Although these two girls were twins, they looked almost the same and their tastes were almost the same. They bought clothes of the same size. When they bought two pieces, at least when they wore the same clothes, Jiang Hai couldn't tell them apart. So the only way for Jiang Hai to distinguish them was their hair. Because Delina wanted to be a thief, her hair was cut very short. She pretended to be a boy so that she wouldn't attract attention. As for Marian, she still had long hair. This was the only difference between the two. But thinking about the future, if the two girls had the same hair length, it would be troublesome. However, although they looked the same and liked almost the same things, their characters were very different. Delina's character was more boorish. She was more curious about new things. She wanted to try everything that she hadn't tried before. She was also more courageous. After getting along with Xiao Bai and Little Yellow, she was now able to play well with them. At least she wasn't afraid of them anymore. Marian was a very well-behaved girl. She was very timid, but she was very careful. She had a very stable resting time. Almost every day she would clean up the house. She was also good at cooking. Compared to the energetic Delina, she was much quieter. She was still afraid of Jiang Hai's pets, but at least she had the courage to feed them. At this time, Jiang Hai was basically a shopkeeper who didn't do anything. He didn't even feed the pets because Marian would feed them. From now on, it could be seen that the characters of the two girls were different. Since boarding the boat, Delina hadn't been obedient. She had been looking outside the boat excitedly, looking forward to seeing something. Although Marian was also very curious and excited, she sat obediently beside Jiang Hai. She only looked up at the opposite window from time to time. After Marian Rupert called out, the fishing boat slowly moved towards the nearest point. Jiang Hai's fishing ground wasn't small, but it wasn't particularly large either. After sailing for about half an hour, the boat had already sailed out of the coral reef and entered the nearest place where Jiang Hai scattered grass seeds. After arriving here, the fishing boat slowly slowed down. "Boss, we're here." Following Marian Rupert's words, Jiang Hai also took out a box of smoke bombs from the cabin and walked out of the cabin with the two girls who had been looking forward to playing on the deck. As soon as they walked out of the cabin, the cold wind that was like an ice blade passed in front of Jiang Hai. It almost instantly went through the gaps in his clothes, making him shiver involuntarily. The northern hemisphere in January was indeed the most unbearable time. It should be the coldest time now. It will be much better in February. Seeing Jiang Hai shiver, Marian Rupert, who was beside him, also said with a smile. As for the two girls, although they were also shivering from the cold, they still opened their eyes curiously and looked outside. The original shore of the endless sea had turned into a thin line at this time. They could vaguely see the woods and buildings on the other side, but they couldn't see the specific details clearly. This was the first time the two girls came to the sea. As soon as they got on the deck, they looked around curiously. Pay attention to safety. Don't get too close to the railing. If you fall, it will be troublesome. After shouting at the two girls, Jiang Hai helped Marian Rupert open the box in front of him. Compared to the two girls, Jiang Hai, who had been to the sea several times, and Marian, who had been dealing with the sea most of his life, the sea was actually not that fun. After all, the sea was different from the land. The land had all kinds of sceneries, but the sea was the same everywhere. It was very novel at first, but after the novelty, it became boring. After opening the box, Jiang Hai and Marian took out some smoke grenades from inside. After opening them, they threw them directly into the sea. The smoke would float on the sea for about 3 hours. After 3 hours, the smoke grenades would lose their effect. Although this also created some marine garbage, this garbage would be carried by the ocean currents to Jiang Hai's beach. At that time, Jiang Hai and the others would naturally clean it up. After throwing 5 or 6 smoke grenades here, Marian got off the boat again and went to the next location. About an hour later, the location was completed. If Jiang Hai was sitting in a plane at this time and looked down from above, he would find that the sky above his fishing ground had been drawn in an irregular circle by colorful smoke. This was the place where the winegrass seeds were needed. About 10 minutes later, a roar slowly passed from a distance. Then a small plane entered Jiang Hai's sight. After the plane's lower cabin door opened, bags of unwrapped grass seeds fell from the cabin into the sea below. So this is how the grass seeds are scattered. I thought it was some kind of high-tech. Looking at the other party throwing the grass seeds directly into the sea, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smack his lips. Originally he thought that planting seaweed might be like planting rice, which would be very troublesome. But obviously the word, troublesome, doesn't exist in the dictionary of the Americans. The Americans, to be exact, are Westerners. They worship the law of nature, which is the survival of the fittest. Whether it's raising or planting things, they don't care too much about them. Except for some extremely luxurious things, they just create the best and most suitable living conditions and then raise them freely. Just like children, most of the children in the United States will not be spoiled like in China. Instead, they will cultivate their independence from an early age. Of course, this is not absolute. There will be people who will spoil and cultivate them. This is a matter of proportion. Chapter 150. The plane above his head left after 3 rounds, and Marlon Rupert returned to the cabin, preparing to return. That's it. Seeing that Marlon had gone down, Jiang Hai also walked into the cabin with Daliana and Marian, who were still unsatisfied. Suddenly he felt that his money seemed to have been spent in vain. He could have just thrown it away casually. He had spent real money to buy those seaweed seeds. How could they just throw them away like that? Can they guarantee that they will grow? Of course that's it. These seaweed seeds were carefully cultivated by them. Before they scattered them, they must have tested the water quality here and watched the weather forecast. They must have confirmed that there will be no southward currents or blizzards recently. As long as these seaweed seeds can safely fall on the sand at the bottom, there is a 70% chance that they will grow into seaweed. Marlon Rupert laughed when he heard Jiang Hai's amateurish words. The sea was not land. You could plant things one by one as long as you didn't find it troublesome. There was water pressure in the sea. The deepest place in Jiang Hai's sea area was a few hundred meters deep. Humans definitely couldn't go down. It was also impossible for machines to do so. Otherwise the seaweed seeds wouldn't be so cheap. Although Jiang Hai understood that Marlon was telling the truth, he still curled his lips. This was the mindset of a small farmer, and he couldn't change it in a short time. I can bear with it if some of the seaweed seeds are washed away. What if the fish run away when I raise them? He thought for a while. The seaweed seeds were indeed cheap, but the fry were expensive. He had spent so much money to buy the fry, so he had to inquire about it. There are 2 ways. One is to build a net around it, but I don't recommend it because it will be very troublesome for our fishing boats to go out. The net and propeller will easily be entangled with these things. Secondly, I also heard that boss bought the fry. The fry are very small at the beginning, so if we build a seine, we need to make the mesh very small. But if the mesh is very small, not only will it block the fry's way out, but it will also block the microorganisms, shrimp, fish, and so on brought in by the ocean currents. The most important thing is actually the microorganisms. In this case, boss, the coral reef you left behind may starve to death in a few years. Once the coral reef dies, the ecological balance here will be destroyed, and even the water quality will become very bad. When Marlon heard Jiang Hai's words, he thought about what Jiang Hai said and understood what Jiang Hai was thinking. Indeed, Jiang Hai was thinking about whether he should use something to block this place, but now listening to Marlon, Jiang Hai also sighed. It seems that his thinking is still too simple. What's the second idea? After hesitating, Jiang Hai asked him. That is to feed them. In addition to the early mullet, cuttlefish, shrimp, and so on, we regularly put some bait in the place where the fish go. This will attract the fish to stay in this area and not go out. It will even attract the fish outside. Now, most marine fisheries do this. Marlon explained after hearing Jiang Hai's words. But if we feed them, it will be very troublesome. Hearing Marlon's words, Jiang Hai thought about it in his heart. Indeed, it is more suitable to use food to keep these fish here than to build a net cage, and the most important thing is, what is Jiang Hai's first goal here? To upgrade the Dragon Balls in his body. If he really destroys the environment of the fishery, it is estimated that he will be dreaming if he wants to grow 8 scales in a day. It's quite troublesome. Right now, we only have fishing boats in our fishery. It's wrong to use these fishing boats to fish, but if we use them to feed, we might be able to go out in the morning and come back the next morning. Marlon said to Jiang Hai after thinking for a while. He heard from Edward Anderson that Jiang Hai has long wanted to buy a plane, and he came to him because he can fly a plane. However, Jiang Hai has not made up his mind recently, but now it seems that he has to make up his mind. Buying a plane is very expensive. Compared with the fish in the fishery, Jiang Hai feels that a plane doesn't seem to be so distressing. After hesitating, Jiang Hai asked Marlon Rupert in front of him. It's okay, but it's not cheap. Generally speaking, a large manor like ours will be equipped with 2 planes, a helicopter and a normal agricultural plane. The fishery I used to work in used Poland's M18, Australia's GA200 is also not bad, and the top one is New Zealand's. But speaking of domestic aircraft, there is the Air Tractor. If you buy this in our country you will get a discount. But recently the Nong 5 in Wuxia is also not bad. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Marlon Rupert also said. Listening to his introduction, Jiang Hai's head is really big. These planes are really diverse. These planes, the cheap ones are $100,000, the expensive ones are about $300,000, I don't know the specifics. In the end, Marlon summarized and gave a price. Hearing this price, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. So cheap. Originally, Jiang Hai thought that a plane, no matter how agricultural it was, would be worth a few $1,000,000. After all, in his impression, planes have always been toys for the rich. At least he didn't dare to think about it before. Thinking about some of the reports he read before, some rich artists bought planes that cost tens of millions or even hundreds of millions. Even if it was 20 million renminbi, it would only be more than $3 million. In his opinion, it was very expensive. This was also the reason why he always said he would buy it but didn't. But now that he heard Marlon Rupert's words, Jiang Hai was stunned. How could a plane be so cheap? In fact, Jiang Hai was confused about one thing. The kind of plane that Jiang Hai was thinking of was a passenger plane that flew everywhere. In addition to the cost of the plane, there was also the cost of the crew, the captain, the fuel, the money to stay at various airports, the money to apply for flight routes, and so on. It could be said that these were two completely different things. Agricultural planes were naturally not passenger planes. Its main structure was actually not much different from the planes in the early stages of World War II. First, it couldn't fly very fast. It was basically impossible to exceed 300 kilometers per hour. To put it bluntly, if a car drove faster it might fly faster than it. Second, it couldn't fly very high. Basically, it could fly more than 1,000 meters. Third, agricultural planes naturally couldn't fly everywhere. Some large airports and the like didn't allow agricultural planes to be used. To put it bluntly, agricultural planes were used for farm work, not to go out and show off. That was all. In fact, the plane that Marlon was talking about was the kind that people drove, large agricultural planes. If it was some small drones, such as the small ones used in forests or planting areas, one could be bought for about $10,000 or even a few $1,000s. Compared to these agricultural planes, those were really big toys. Where can I buy these planes? Do I have to build a runway or something? Hearing Marlon Rupert's introduction, Jiang Hai was also a little tempted. If it was only a few $100,000 or a few $100,000, he really didn't care too much, so he immediately asked. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Marlon smiled. Boss, do you have a black card? Boss, don't you have a black gold card? You can make a phone call and American Express will do it for you. They can help you contact them for whatever you want to buy. As for the runway problem, it's also easy. Because it's a small agricultural plane, it's not heavy, so you can just build a flat cement road for a few hundred meters on the edge of the manor's pasture. Plus the warehouse to park the plane, it will cost more than $10,000. Based on his experience, Marlon Rupert calculated and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai was also very tempted. When the boat returned to the dock, Jiang Hai first called American Express. Soon after, a seductive female voice prompted him. His phone received some company quotes and details of the planes. There were dozens of planes in total. Jiang Hai himself didn't know much about these things. He didn't understand at all. He could only understand how high the plane could fly, how heavy it was, and how much it weighed when it took off. After all, they were all planes. The weight of these planes was at least 1 ton. However, what interested Jiang Hai the most was the Air Tractor. Although this was the most expensive agricultural plane because he was an investor in the United States, he bought this thing with a discount. Among the Air Tractor series, Jiang Hai was most interested in the AT-802. One of the reasons why Jiang Hai was interested in this kind of plane was that the plane itself was particularly big. With a weight of 3 tons, this guy was a giant among the agricultural tractors. Just like buying a car, Jiang Hai liked big things. The maximum takeoff weight was 6.5 tons, the maximum cruising speed was 280 kilometers per hour, and the maximum speed was 360 kilometers per hour. Although it wasn't particularly fast, it was still the fastest agricultural plane. The reason why Jiang Hai decided so quickly was mainly because of some other news. This kind of aircraft was not only an extremely powerful existence in terms of agricultural use, but it was also an extremely powerful existence in other aspects. Even in South America or some less developed countries, this kind of plane belonged to the series of fighter jets. Because of the high cruising speed and weight, it meant that the metal sheet was thick, the defense was good, and the carrying capacity was high. This meant that it could be modified into any shape you wanted. All kinds of weapons such as Gatling guns and rockets, as long as you wanted it, it could be installed. Even Wuxia had bought many of these planes. What did this mean? It meant that this thing was indeed a good thing. Although Jiang Hai didn't think of installing missiles on it, he was sure that this thing was not very expensive, so he didn't hesitate. Chapter 151. Hey boss, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to blow up Winthrop? Jiang Hai's intention to buy a plane was a big deal. After all, he had just arrived here and didn't know much about these things. Therefore, after deciding what to buy, he didn't directly pay for it. Instead, he planned to discuss it with his subordinates. After learning that Jiang Hai wanted to buy this Big Mac, not to mention others, Philip was the first to shout. Blow up my ass. Do you think I can blow up a small town in the United States just because I want to? Are you kidding me? Although Jiang Hai had the idea of modifying it, he wouldn't admit it in front of Philip and the others. Hey boss, the air tractor is good, but it consumes too much fuel. If you really don't want to blow up Winthrop, then there's no point in buying it. That's right. To be honest, boss, we just want to buy a plane to throw some bait or patrol the surrounding area. We don't need such a heavy plane. The price is enough to buy 5 dromedaries. I don't think it's necessary. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia and the head of the fishermen, Edward Anderson, who had just returned, also said hesitantly. These two were people who dealt with the ocean and ranching all year round. In their eyes, spending money was fine, but every dollar should be spent on the blade. If Jiang Hai wanted to buy a private plane, they had no right to ask how much it would cost. However, if he wanted to buy a plane for the manor, it would be a little too expensive. Hey boss, I support you. When I was in the Triangle State, we also had this guy. This guy really has a lot of uses. After modification, it can be used directly on the battlefield. If it's not modified, it can also be used as a battlefield ambulance plane. If it's not hit by a rocket launcher, no matter how large a caliber gun hits it, it's impossible to penetrate its protective panel. At this time, Bell said with a smile. Although he said he supported Jiang Hai could tell that he didn't support Jiang Hai's decision. After all, this thing was too expensive. If they really didn't need to fight, then there was really no need to buy it. However, once Jiang Hai made a decision, he wouldn't be so easily persuaded. You have to be clear that what we need is a large agricultural plane. Our manor is this big now and the fishing ground is this big. But I might need to expand it. I see a lot of empty land near us. Those are my targets. Looking at the people in front of him, Jiang Hai said with a serious face. As for the expansion, he said, well, he was actually lying. He has invested so much money in this manor now, and he hasn't seen any results yet. How can he easily invest more money? Boss, stop fooling around. If you buy a fishing ground, you'll be buying the high seas. The US government won't dare to sell it to you there. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Tommy Charles didn't believe it and said with a smile. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Indeed, the range of his fishing ground was about to reach the high seas. If he bought more, wouldn't he have to buy the high seas as well? Thinking of this, he also felt that his excuse was a little fake. Just as Jiang Hai fell into embarrassment, a voice slowly came from behind. Actually, I feel that there is no problem with the boss buying this plane. Looking at the voice, they saw Marlon Rupert standing not far behind Jiang Hai and talking leisurely. Because the boss's fish are very mixed, if these fish are placed in one place, they will easily kill each other. Fortunately, the boss's fishing ground is very big, so they can be placed in different places. But in this case, to feed them, they will have to go to many places. If it's a plane like a dromedary, there will be no way to continue to go to 2 places. But if it's an air tractor, then there is no need to worry about cruising at all. It can put all the fish in one place, which will save a lot of trouble. Hearing Marlon Rupert's words, everyone remembered this. The guy in front of them was not a master who played by the rules. When others bought fish, they tried to buy fish that could be raised together, but he was different. This guy bought a bunch of fish in the east and a bunch of fish in the west. Most importantly, many of the fish were predatory and couldn't be raised together. If that's the case, the air tractor is not bad. Hearing this, Edward Anderson also nodded. Hearing the fisherman's boss say so, the others couldn't say anything and could only agree. Hearing that everyone agreed, Jiang Hai immediately called the company's American Express service. The phone rang less than 3 times before it was picked up. It was the same sweet female voice who asked Jiang Hai in Chinese, "Hello, Mr. Jiang, I am Maxie Williams. How may I help you?" Although Jiang Hai's funds were slowly decreasing at this time, the amount on his card was at least 8 figures. He was definitely a big customer of American Express, so the operator naturally didn't dare to be careless. Hearing the operator's voice, it was indeed sweet. At least 5+ signs were needed, but Jiang Hai was already used to it. Hello Miss Maxie, I'm Jiang Hai. I've decided to buy an air tractor at 802. Where do I need to buy it? How much is it? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Maxie continued to ask, Hello sir. What model do you want? Model? I'm really not sure. Hearing Maxie's question, Jiang Hai was stunned. He didn't look carefully just now. It's like this. At 802 is a general name. There are many submodels under it, such as the Model A. This plane is mainly used for conversion into a private jet. The price is slightly more expensive and needs to be customized separately. The price of the Bear plane is $680,000 and needs to be shipped back from the headquarters in Texas. The Model U plane is an anti-riot plane. It can be equipped with many types of weapons, equipment, and so on. You can choose to customize and install it yourself, but you need to apply for a local license to install it. The price of the Bear plane is $710,000. The price of the other modified planes is uncertain. If you want to choose a plane for your manor, you can choose the Model F. This model is mainly used for forest firefighting and agricultural applications. It can be used for spraying medicine and feeding food and bait. The price of the Bear plane is $410,000, but if you buy it, there will be a certain discount. The price is about $370,000. Moreover, this model is sold all over the country, so it's convenient for you to pick it up at any time. Hearing Maxie Williams's words, Jiang Hai remembered that it seemed to be like this. I want the Model F. He didn't even need to think about it. Even if he bought a private jet in the future, it was impossible to buy an air tractor modified. Not to mention the Model A, $380,747, he had to at least buy something similar. But now those were just floating clouds. After all, his manor didn't have any income yet. Okay, F-type air tractor, there is a sales place in New York. You can choose to see it yourself or you can choose to buy it for you. Hearing that Jiang Hai has decided, Maxie Williams also said sweetly, Then I'll buy it myself. It wasn't that Jiang Hai didn't trust American Express. It was mainly because he was a farmer. It was also known as persecutory paranoia. He had been thinking about what if these guys were lying to him. He could think about other things, but if the plane suddenly broke down in the middle of the flight, who could he cry to? At that time he would be all alone. The little savings in the bank and this manor would all be taken by the American government. In the spirit of not letting anyone take advantage of the American government, Jiang Hai decided to go see it himself. Okay Mr. Jiang. The New York Farm aircraft is sold at XX Street in Manhattan. If you need anything you can call me at any time. Maxie Williams smiled and said when she heard that Jiang Hai had decided to go see it himself. After the phone call, Jiang Hai fell into deep thought. Originally, he wanted to go to New York soon because he still had the tickets that Moses Adams had helped him get. As a basketball enthusiast, he could only watch the All-Star game in front of the TV in the past. Now that he finally had the chance to go live, he couldn't let it go. Therefore he had to go. Now he just had to bring it forward. Jiang Hai had already decided that the All-Star game would end on February 16th, Wuxia time. After watching the game he would take a flight back to Wuxia that night. Including the transfer time, it would be around February 18th. He had to go back on New Year's Eve. It wouldn't delay him from burning Joss paper. After spending New Year's at home, he could bring Fu Yuan and the others over to play. As for the others, if they were free they could come over and play. He didn't lack the money to play with them anyway. However, there was a problem. Delina and Marion had just been adopted by him this year. Although they could now live in Jiang Hai's house, there would still be people from the welfare agency coming to check on them from time to time. Most importantly, in order to prevent Jiang Hai from being a human trafficker, he didn't allow them to leave the United States with him. It wasn't a problem to go to New York to watch the game, but it seemed that he couldn't go back to China. He had to discuss this with them. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at Delina and Marion. Seeing Jiang Hai's gaze, the two girls looked at each other. It was obvious that they didn't understand the reason. When they saw Jiang Hai looking at them, they looked at Jiang Hai and blinked. Oh, you too. Seeing their actions, Jiang Hai was amused. He couldn't help but rub their heads. Some things had to be said eventually. It wasn't his style to hesitate. Chapter 152. Are you guys really not going? Really not going? Standing in front of his F-650, Jiang Hai looked at the two sisters in front of him with a serious expression. When the two sisters heard Jiang Hai's words, they blinked their big eyes. After looking at each other, they shook their heads very seriously. Well, sometimes people like to think too much. Obviously, Jiang Hai was such an existence. He originally thought that if he were to leave, Xiao Huang, Xiao Bai, Dai, Qiu, Elena, and Marian would be very sad, very uncomfortable, and very reluctant to leave. It turned out that it was just an illusion. After he made his decision that day, he told the two girls that he was going to return to China during dinner that night. After he finished speaking, the two girls did not cry, throw a tantrum, get angry, or throw a tantrum. At that time, the two girls just looked at him seriously and nodded to show that they understood. Then he said in disbelief that he was going to watch an NBA game and asked them if they wanted to go. Who knew that they weren't interested in it either? It was understandable. Girls, especially a girl who couldn't even eat her fill in the past, would not have the time and energy to be interested in basketball and the NBA. So they weren't willing to go. Originally, this should have been a good thing for Jiang Hai. He could go to New York without worry and go home without worry. But why did he feel so unhappy when he saw the two girls' nonchalant expressions? These days, he had been beating around the bush and asking the two girls if they were really not going. In the end, the answer he got was, they were not going. In fact, Jiang Hai did feel that he was a bit too important. The two girls stayed with him not because they liked him or were overly dependent on him, but because they really needed a place to take them in. Otherwise, Deliana would not have taken the initiative to give herself to him after she decided to stay. They did not treat Jiang Hai as their father. Indeed, it was not easy to treat a man who was only 13 years older than them as their father. Their original idea was that even if Deliana had to sacrifice her body, she would still want to give her sister a good living environment. Even if she became Jiang Hai's lover, she would still have a better life. However, they did not expect Jiang Hai to be so good to them. In fact, it was not just them, even the 8 women had the same idea. In their opinion, the reason why Jiang Hai was willing to take them in and let them stay in the manor to help out was secondary. It was very likely that Jiang Hai liked them. For them, using their bodies in exchange for a place to live and food to eat, they had already acquiesced. Becoming a tool for Jiang Hai to vent his anger was better than living a life of not being able to eat enough, not being able to wear warm clothes, living in a wooden shed, and trembling in fear. They never had the luxury of living like a normal person. In fact, even if Jiang Hai had asked them to sleep in their own rooms, they wouldn't have had any objections. Similarly, after these days they found that they were really living in a dream. This Jiang Hai didn't seem to have any other thoughts about them. This made them feel touched but also a little guilty. After all, they didn't have an official job. Although the hardware of the wine manor was there, they still needed to wait until the beginning of spring, which was March, to plant grapes. Recently they had been eating for free. Moreover, Jiang Hai didn't want their bodies, which made them feel sorry for Jiang Hai. Therefore, during the day they would always stay in Jiang Hai's villa to help with work, clean up, bathe Little White and the others, take care of things and so on. Even at night they would always stay until very late. In fact, they were hinting to Jiang Hai that he could let them stay. However, Jiang Hai really didn't know anything about this aspect. Even after so many days he still couldn't figure it out. He only thought that these girls came to his house every day mainly because they had nothing to do during the day. Moreover, the other women in the manor were also very wary of them. They had no place to go and they were somewhat dependent on him, so they came to his house every day. It turned out that Jiang Hai was indeed thinking too much. Since the grass seeds were scattered, everything went according to plan. 3 days after the grass seeds were scattered, the grass seed company made a special trip to check how many grass seeds were left on the seabed after the previous scattering. Then they replanted 2 more times. The grass seeds were completely planted by the grass seed company. Edouard Anderlin had been watching by the other party's side. This was not because Jiang Hai was narrow-minded, but because he did not feel at ease if he did not send someone to watch over these things. Compared to these people, he was more at ease with Edouard Anderson, whom he had trusted for a few months. After Anderson confirmed that the grass seeds had begun to grow and reached the expectations, Jiang Hai did not withhold the payment and directly transferred the balance to the company. Having such a straightforward customer, the company's manager was also quite happy. After all, Jiang Hai's job was a big one. Doing such a job was equivalent to his usual quarterly earnings. As long as it was done well, Jiang Hai would inevitably need to replenish the sea of grass every year. At that time, even if the company did not earn that much at one time, it would still be a considerable income. Because of this, he specially gave Jiang Hai a discount. For things like discounts, Jiang Hai naturally did not refuse. After all, he did not have a proper income yet. After half a month of growth, the seaweed officially grew and began to take root and germinate. The construction period of the second wave of the fishery had arrived. At this time, live bait would be put in. In fact, it was called live bait, but it was mainly 4 kinds of creatures. Of course, it was not the real cuttlefish but the cuttlefish. It was not too clear to call it cuttlefish. This cuttlefish was such a small cuttlefish that could not grow up. In China, this cuttlefish was called sycamore flower. It was born to live at the bottom of the marine food chain. This small cuttlefish was the food of almost all aquatic fish. Its only characteristic was that it was extremely large in number, and naturally it was also very cheap. For example, the cuttlefish that Jiang Hai fed to the fish only cost $300 per ton. A boat of 10 tons of squid was only $3,000, which was quite cheap. In North America, no one ate this kind of squid. Those 2 types of mollusks were the most abundant. After all, each boat only cost $3,000. Considering the number of fish that Jiang Hai wanted to raise, 20 boats of each type would be enough, although he would have to replenish them on a regular basis. After all, Jiang Hai was free-range and they could reproduce on their own. 10 boats only cost $30,000, so 40 boats in total would be settled for $120,000. Compared with those 2 types of food, the other 2 types of food were slightly more expensive. As for the other 2 types of creatures, one was the Arctic prawn. Since it didn't matter how big or small it was also sold by the ton. However, a ton of these prawns cost $2,000, which was $2 per kilogram. They were all alive, so it wasn't that expensive. Jiang Hai liked these kinds of prawns very much, so he bought 10 boats of them for $200,000. In addition, there were also some miscellaneous shellfish. These shellfish didn't have much meat, and their shells made up most of their weight. However, these shellfish were indispensable because apart from fish, Jiang Hai also raised a lot of crabs and lobsters. These shellfish were mainly their food, so in addition to the fact that the shells of these shellfish were too heavy, they were basically uncountable. 10 tons of shellfish and 9 tons of shells. Even so, 1 ton still cost $500 or 50 cents per kilogram, which was almost double the price of cuttlefish and octopus. However, in order to raise the lobsters and crabs that he would raise in the future, Jiang Hai still reluctantly bought 30 boats of these things. Each boat weighed 10 tons, which was $150,000. In addition, there were other miscellaneous items which cost Jiang Hai $500,000 in total. Ever since Jiang Hai's seaweed began to rise, the company that he contacted would put in 1 or several boats of these baits in different areas every day or 2. They wouldn't put them in all at once. This was because if they put in too many baits at the beginning, they would swim away in groups. Therefore, they had to wait for these guys to digest for a while before pouring them in slowly. This was considered a delicate job. Fortunately, all of this was within the process that Edward Anderson and Jiang Hai had discussed. The entire month of February was used to spread the bait, and it was only in March that the fry were officially put in. Because recently, the deaf and mute girls in the family often helped with the chores, Jiang Hai didn't even need to wash his own socks. So he had more time to put his energy into the manor's construction, especially the construction of the runway and hangar. Although he couldn't help much, it didn't stop him from watching from the sidelines. As the weather gradually warmed up, the snow gradually melted, and the sun in the middle of February gradually raised the temperature above zero. Time gradually passed and it was February 12th. There were only 2 days left until the first day of the All-Star Weekend, which was February 14th. Jiang Hai still had to go to New York to buy a plane, so it was time for Jiang Hai to leave. Chapter 153. Alright then, I'll be leaving. Xiao Bai, Xiao Huang Buck, you guys have to listen to me. Chirp chirp, don't let it eat too much recently. This bird has become too fat. Also, you guys have to take good care of yourselves. Every night before you go to bed you have to video call me. Do you understand? Looking at the 2 big Lolas who didn't care about his expression at all, Jiang Hai's heart turned cold. But even so, he was still like a father, telling them everything. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, although the 2 girls didn't have any expression on their faces, they were telling the truth. From their trembling hands and trembling eyes, it could be seen that they were very touched. It had been a long time since someone cared about them like this. You guys too. If there's anything, you can video call me at any time. After instructing the girls, Jiang Hai raised his head and looked at the 8 women who came to send him off, then said to them, "Let's go." These girls originally didn't have cell phones. For them, cell phones were useless because they couldn't make calls. Although cell phones could video still cost data. No one would think that making a call in the United States didn't cost money, right? They originally didn't even have money for food, so it was impossible for those people to arrange cell phones for them. After they came to Jiang Hai's place, Jiang Hai also gave each of them a cell phone. It was the latest iPhone 5S from Apple. Don't think that this thing is very expensive. It turned out that Apple really wasn't expensive in the United States. The three cell phones came with 16G, 32G, and 64G, and the contract phone cost $199, $299, and $399 respectively. Of course, this was referring to the contract phone. This meant that when they bought it, they had to pay a 15% activation fee and a 7% tax. In total, they had to pay $199, which was $227. After that, they had to go through the procedures. Every month, they would have to pay $20 for the phone and $20 for the data package. In other words, it would be $40 a month. Some people said that this wasn't appropriate. $40 a month, that would be $960 for 2 years. The price of a non-contract phone was $649, which was actually much more expensive. Jiang Hai chuckled at this. It seemed that they were trying to change the topic. It seemed that the cost of the cell phone and the package added up to $1,200. Compared to $650, it was $550 more expensive. However, who would buy a cell phone and make a call for less than $600 in 2 years? No one would be naive enough to think that calling in the United States would cost RMB. Of course, the main reason why they didn't buy a contract phone in China was because the quality of the two things were different. But in the United States, they didn't have to worry about this because if they broke, they could be replaced. Therefore, the girls in Jiang Hai's manor each had a $199 iPhone 5S. It was a very expensive configuration in China, but in the United States, it was really a low-grade equipment. After buying the phones for the girls, Jiang Hai taught them how to use it. They could send messages and video chat. This way they would have a communication tool in the future. We will take good care of ourselves. Don't worry. Hearing Jiang Hai's nagging, Daliana slowly gestured. These days she had been teaching Jiang Hai sign language every night. Although the progress was a little slow, the effect was good. At the very least, Jiang Hai had a preliminary understanding of some of the words. In normal communication he could even guess the correct words. Finally, the problem of communication between the two was solved. Jiang Hai felt that his blood might be helpful to the defects of these girls, but he was still not too sure. Secondly, he didn't know much about these girls, so he still needed to take it slow. Moreover, the most important thing was that he was about to level up. He wanted to level up first. Well, boss, if you don't leave now, the plane will be too late. Just when Jiang Hai was about to mutter, Belle, who was sitting in his car, couldn't help but smile and say, because Jiang Hai was going back to China directly from New York, he didn't plan to drive. Well, take care of yourself. I'm leaving. After saying a few more words to these girls, Jiang Hai stepped on his car. After Jiang Hai sat down, Belle also started the engine and went out of the manor. Watching Jiang Hai leave, the girls also bit their lips. They really couldn't see through Jiang Hai. Maybe this guy is really a good person. At this time, Jiang Hai didn't know that he had been given 10 good person cards. Soon after the car left the manor, it got on the road and went straight to the highway. Boston Airport was outside Boston, and it was in the same direction as Winthrop. That was to say, Boston Airport and Winthrop were in the middle, so he didn't need to go to Boston Airport to go to the airport. In less than half an hour, Jiang Hai had already arrived at Boston Airport. Because he had already booked a ticket online, he directly changed his ticket and went through the security check. This time he went to New York, which could be said to be returning to China. He almost didn't bring anything with him. He just brought 2 sets of clothes, that's all. First, he didn't have any relatives in China. He felt that he was going back mainly to visit his parents' graves. He was too lazy to visit relatives. Second, his local specialties couldn't be brought directly on the plane. Did he have to bring a pile of premium-grade beef to New York to watch the game? So before this, he had already used air courier to send these things back to China. He first asked his brothers to help him keep them, and he would distribute them when he went back. So naturally, at this time he was going light. After passing the security check, Jiang Hai didn't go directly to the waiting hall, but went to the waiting room of the first-class cabin. Although it was only 2 to 3 hours drive from Boston to New York, since he was going to take a plane with Jiang Hai's current wealth, he would take the first-class cabin. Not only would he take it here, but he would also take the best one back home. It was not that he was pretentious, it was purely because he had money to burn. Well, after he had money, he really didn't want to squeeze into the economy cabin anymore. Anyway, in his opinion, the price of the first-class cabin and the economy cabin was not much different. Soon after sitting in the waiting hall of the first-class cabin, there was a message that they were ready to board the plane. Passengers in the first-class cabin were given priority to board the plane. After lamenting that the flight attendants of American Airlines were really ugly, Jiang Hai nestled on the huge sofa and prepared for the plane to take off. Not long after, the plane took off. Jiang Hai also leaned on the sofa and fell asleep. But before he could fall asleep, the plane had already arrived. Boston and New York were too close. It was so close that even if an NBA team played a game, they would take a bus instead of going to the airport. Because of the time spent waiting at the airport, they might have already arrived by car. Only Jiang Hai, who was not going to drive, would take a plane. Of course, in fact, he could take a long-distance bus which was not slow, but when he thought about squeezing in a bus with so many people, Jiang Hai still felt that it was better to take a plane, even if all the flight attendants on this plane were over 40 years old and had waists of more than 2 feet 6 inches. A little more than an hour later, the plane landed on the tarmac of New York's JFK Airport. As the ground crew connected the covered bridge, Jiang Hai and the other first-class passengers also got off the plane early. As soon as he walked out of the airport, Jiang Hai saw a black car in the distance. The car was not unfamiliar to Jiang Hai, and he was even more familiar with the person standing in front of the car. "Hey boss, you're here." Seeing Jiang Hai walking towards his car, Moses Adams, who was standing in front of the car, also greeted him with a smile and said to Jiang Hai with a happy face. Since he knew that Jiang Hai liked basketball and he got Jiang Hai's tickets, it was not a big deal for him to come and watch the game with Jiang Hai. In order to keep a potential and powerful customer like Jiang Hai, he was very careful. "You've been here for a long time?" Jiang Hai asked Moses Adams with a smile as he walked in front of him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams immediately waved his hand. "Oh no, I just arrived. Come on boss, I'll take you to the hotel, I've arranged everything." Hearing what Moses Adams said, Jiang Hai smiled, then threw his small bag in the back seat and sat in the passenger seat of Moses Adams' car. After seeing Jiang Hai sit down, Moses Adams also took him to the center of New York City. This was Jiang Hai's first time in New York, so as soon as he entered the city, he looked around curiously. For Jiang Hai, New York's name was much more important than his own sense of existence. New York, the largest city in New York State, the largest city in the United States, and the largest city in the world. It was the most densely populated city in the United States. Its existence could directly affect the world's economy, finance, media, politics, education, entertainment, and even the fashion industry. Its GDP was also the world's largest. Before that, it was the capital of Japan. As soon as the car drove into New York, Jiang Hai felt the difference between this city and Winthrop or even Boston. The pace of life here was faster, the people here were more hurried, the buildings were higher, and there were more cars. As soon as he arrived here, it gave people a very busy feeling. Maybe he was used to staying in the manor recently. When he suddenly arrived here, Jiang Hai was really not used to it. Maybe he saw Jiang Hai's curiosity about the city. Moses Adams, who acted as a driver beside him, also kept introducing the city. However, Jiang Hai only took a cursory look. If he wanted to see the sights here in New York, it would take at least a few days, but he obviously didn't have so much time to visit here. He had already arranged everything for these days. He would rest here today, go to Space City tomorrow, and go to All Stars the day after tomorrow. Chapter 154. Look, this is our destination this time, the home court of the New York Knicks, MSG. As Moses Adams introduced the place, Jiang Hai also observed the existence of the city of hope and destruction. After about an hour of driving into the city, the car finally arrived at the first stop. As Moses Adams stepped on the brakes, a huge circular building appeared in front of Jiang Hai. The building was really big, like a big cake. Although it was not as big as the high-rise buildings next to it, it was still very surprising. However, the most surprising thing was that it was not only a court but also a station. MSG, Madison Square Garden's nickname, New York's locals or people nearby call it that, is above New York's largest Penn station. This is done so that everyone who comes to New York by train can see it first after getting off the train and understand the city. Boss, you may not know this, but this arena is not just the home court of the Knicks. It is also the home court of the New York Rangers, New York Liberty, St. John's University, Red Storm University, and other teams. It is also the place where all musicians, speakers, and politicians in the United States hold their concerts or speeches the most. Looking at the building in front of him, Moses Adams's shrewd eyes revealed a rare look that was not so shrewd. For him, even if he was not working in New York now, this building still made him very proud. Looking at his expression, Jiang Hai also smiled. Perhaps this was like the Great Wall and the Forbidden City in China. After all, the history of the United States was only a short period of time. They did not have any historical deposits, and they could not recognize the Native Americans who had lived on this land for a long time as their ancestors. Therefore, they did not have a sense of historical achievement and belonging that could make them feel more proud. It was also because of this that the United States had also supported some landmark buildings over the years, giving them special meanings other than architecture. Obviously, Madison Square Garden was one of them. Everyone who was familiar with basketball knew that Madison Square Garden was the mecca of the basketball world. Every year the NBA draft was held there. In addition to the NBA, the other leagues also had special feelings for this place. "Alright boss, let's come back the day after tomorrow. We have to go back to the hotel now. Put down your luggage and have dinner. I have arranged a special program for you tonight." Perhaps Moses Adams was done lamenting. He retracted his gaze and became shrewd again. Then he looked at Jiang Hai and winked gently. This made Jiang Hai feel a little strange. "Show? What program? Don't forget we have to buy a plane tomorrow." Yes, this time Jiang Hai asked Moses Adams to come, not only to accompany him to watch the game, but also to buy a plane, and he needed his help to take a look. "Don't worry, boss. It won't affect our business." Moses Adams knew how important the plane Jiang Hai wanted to buy was to his manner, so he just smiled. Then he walked back to the car, started the engine and left. The hotel Jiang Hai was going to stay at tonight was not particularly far from here. It did not take long for them to arrive. When the car was parked, a doorman took the initiative to open the door for Jiang Hai and Moses Adams to get out of the car. After standing still, Jiang Hai looked up. Wow, it was really a famous hotel, the Hilton Hotel. Speaking of this hotel, not only in the United States but also internationally, it had a great reputation. This hotel was founded in 1919 by the emperor of the hotel industry, the hotel tycoon, Conrad Hilton. Their hotels existed in Europe, America, the Asia-Pacific region, and even the Middle East and Africa. It could be said that this was the top 5-star hotel in the world. It was Jiang Hai's first time staying in such a hotel. "Boss, this way please." Seeing Jiang Hai standing at the door, Moses Adams, who was about to walk in, stepped back and said to him. Hearing Moses Adams' words, Jiang Hai also smiled a little awkwardly, carried his backpack and walked into the hotel. Looking at this hotel from the outside, it was magnificent enough. But after walking in, one would find that the outside was the outside, and the inside was actually the most dazzling. Not only was the decoration extremely high-end, even the waiters passing by were handsome men and women, making it easy for people to have a good impression of this place. While Jiang Hai was still looking around, Moses Adams had already gone to change the room card, because he had already booked it. There were 2 standard suites. Although they were not presidential suites, they were not bad. According to Moses Adams, in addition to the master bedroom, there was a separate living room, bathroom, dining room, and a room similar to a chess room. It was very spacious. Recently, it was the All-Star weekend, and there were many rich people and celebrities who came to watch the game. If it were not for his own connections, it would not have been so easy to book a suite here. "Boss, let's go. I know you Wuxia people are particular about this. This is for you." After briefly explaining to Jiang Hai, he handed a room card to Jiang Hai. The room number on the card was 8888. Looking at the room number and listening to Moses Adams' words, Jiang Hai also smiled. Indeed, Wuxia people were particular about this. Because neither of them had luggage, naturally, there was no bellboy to take them to the room, which saved them a lot of tips. When they arrived at the door of the room, Moses Adams, who lived not far from Jiang Hai, called out to Jiang Hai. "Boss, when you go back in a while you can take a shower and change your clothes. Then we'll go for dinner first. After dinner I'll take you to a good place to play." Seeing Moses Adams raise his eyebrows, although Jiang Hai was not too sure from his words and actions, he felt that this guy was definitely up to no good. He was not worried that this guy would kidnap him or anything like that. Jiang Hai was not that easy to deal with. According to Jiang Hai's estimation, this guy wanted to use a man's way to get to know him. If a man wanted to have a better friendship with another man, other than being gay, there were only 4 ways. Whether it was at home or abroad, such things were not uncommon. "Diske, this guy is really wretched, but it's not bad to go and have a look. I decided to go and have a look because I want to criticize the justice of this evil world. It's not because I haven't had sex for 2 or 3 years. Looking at Moses Adams, who was far away, Jiang Hai couldn't help but raise a middle finger at him, and then he whispered. But why did it feel like the more he whispered, the softer his voice became? After entering the room, Jiang Hai did listen to Moses Adams and took a shower first. The bathtub in this suite also had a massage function, which was quite comfortable. Originally, after taking a shower, he was ready to sleep, but for some reason he couldn't fall asleep in bed. The wretched look of Moses Adams talking to him just now kept replaying in front of him, which made him a little, overwhelmed. In fact, Jiang Hai really hadn't touched a woman for a while. Damn this damn guy. Cursing again, Jiang Hai rolled on the bed. He didn't know when he fell asleep. When he was awakened by Moses Adams knocking on the door, it was already 4:30. When he saw Jiang Hai's sleepy appearance, Moses Adams smiled. "I say, boss, you can really fall asleep." "Ah, don't sleep. Wash your face. Let's go eat. The show will start in a while." When Moses Adams mentioned the show, Jiang Hai's eyes lit up in an instant. "Okay, wait for me." After saying that, Jiang Hai went back to the room, washed his face, then put on a new set of clothes and walked out. But just as he walked out, he was stopped by Moses Adams. "Boss, didn't you bring other clothes?" Change to something more expensive." After thinking about it, Moses Adams considered Jiang Hai's usual dressing habits and changed his words to remind Jiang Hai. "Who the F***CK, isn't this expensive enough? Brand Archaeopteryx." When he heard Moses Adams' words, Jiang Hai's eyebrows raised. "In the beginning it's just a bird. This dress, no matter how expensive it is still outdoor. Have you ever seen someone wearing outdoor clothes to pick up girls?" "Boss, with all due respect, girls nowadays are very realistic. If you don't encounter ghosts crying and gods howling, it's better to pay more attention to your dressing." Hearing Jiang Hai's shocked words, Moses Adams showed a helpless expression and slowly explained to him, but his words made Jiang Hai speechless. "The problem is, I don't have other clothes. I don't like to wear other clothes." Glancing at the room, Jiang Hai came out this time with a total of 3 sets of clothes. He wore one set and brought 2 sets, but unfortunately these 3 sets of clothes were all outdoor. A long time ago, Jiang Hai liked to wear sportswear for nearly 10 years, but in recent years he liked to wear outdoor clothes. It didn't look so young, it was comfortable, and it didn't restrict his activities. For example, he didn't like suits at all. Even casual suits, he didn't like to wear them, so he didn't have any of them. The only one he had was the one he wore when he married Lu Li. When he left, he also left it at Chi Li's house. It was made for him by her family. "Since it's just clothes, then that's it, but we need to add some other things." Scratching his head, since Jiang Hai didn't want to wear it, then Moses Adams couldn't force Jiang Hai to wear a suit, right? He could only think of other ways. Chapter 155. Moses Adams was now very glad that he had considered enough time, so he came to call Jiang Hai at 4:30. If he had really called Jiang Hai on time, it was estimated that it would be too late now. Since Jiang Hai did not want to change his clothes, he had to think of other ways. The two of them went downstairs without eating. They got into the car that was already at the door and went straight to New York's Fifth Avenue. Fifth Avenue was an important thoroughfare in the Manhattan area of New York. It ran from north to south, from Washington Square Park in the south to 138th Street in the north. There were many scenic spots on Fifth Avenue. From south to north, there was the Empire State Building, the New York Public Library, Rockefeller Center, Rockefeller Foundation, St. Patrick's Church, Central Park, and so on. But at this time, Moses Adams and Jiang Hai did not come here to see the scenic spots. Instead, they came to the section between 60th Street and 34th Street, a place called Dream Street. Almost all the luxury brands in the world gathered here. It was one of the most high-end shopping districts in the world. Someone calculated that the shops on this street had an annual rent of $1,000 per square foot, about 0.09 square meters. That was to say, 1 square meter would cost more than $10,000. The annual rent of a small shop here was more than $100,000. It could be seen that if one did not open for 3 years and opened for 3 years, one would lose a lot of money. Of course, those luxury stores were not those that did not open for business for 3 years, nor were they those that opened for business for 3 years. But even so, most of the time it was the season when people would see more and buy less. The only exception was probably when the Wuxia tour group came. Those Andes were very rich. Moses Adams dragged Jiang Hai here to buy things, but he did not expect to earn a commission. Men and women were two completely different life forms. The values, psychology, and so on of these two life forms were completely different. Even if they paid attention to the opposite sex, their viewpoints were naturally different. When men looked at women, the first thing they looked at was the face, the second was the figure, and the third was the clothes, the way they dressed, and the way they talked. Only then would they have the idea to explore further. But women looked at men differently. Just like what the ancients once said, girls love pretty boys and girls love girls. When girls were young, that is, when they were 16 or 17 or 17 or 18, they paid more attention to the boys' looks and popularity. For example, the captain of a basketball team, the captain of a football team, and so on were very popular. Of course, if they were handsome and had such skills, they would be the favored son of God, commanding the wind and clouds of the school. However, as they grew older, the things that girls paid more attention to gradually changed. Perhaps for some girls, looks were still very important. But for most girls, especially the girls who were going to the place Jiang Hai and Moses Adams were going, looks were obviously not as attractive as Franklin. For these women, they could judge a man's general situation by looking at his things. Unless you're really famous like Bill Gates. Even if he wore briefs and walked barefoot on the streets, countless women would still throw themselves at him. If you're not that famous, then you'll have to rely on these external factors. Of course, some people might say that such women were not sincere. Love did not need to be tarnished like this. However, Moses Adams would tell you, who needed her to be sincere. Well, even if there was, it was impossible to give it to them. This was also the reason why Jiang Hai came here. How to judge whether a man was rich or not, whether he had the strength. For a woman, the simplest preliminary judgment was 3 points. First, what kind of clothes, second, what kind of car, and third, what kind of watch. He didn't want to change Jiang Hai's clothes, so he let it go. He also couldn't buy a car now, so he let it go. The most likely thing to show that he was rich was a watch. It was said that the poor played with cars, the rich played with watches, the loser played with mobile phones, and the rich played with supercars. But for Jiang Hai, he had only heard about it before. He really did not play with these. Although he was not short of money now, in terms of his realm, he was still in the category of playing with mobile phones. Now, Moses Adams wanted him to skip the level of playing with cars and directly upgrade to playing with watches. He really couldn't bear it. We're here. But Moses Adams was still very considerate of his boss. He drove the car over and parked it directly in front of a building. After the two got out of the car, Jiang Hai also followed Moses Adams into the shop. "Hello, sir, what can I do for you?" When the two of them walked in, a good-looking girl came out with a smile that showed 8 teeth. She asked the two respectfully, but when she asked, her eyes were mainly looking at Moses Adams. Judging from his aura and clothes, it was obvious that he was the one who was in charge. "My boss wants to buy a watch, so I brought him here to see it." Moses Adams was a smart person. He immediately saw that the other party did not seem to take Jiang Hai too seriously, so he immediately said seriously and specifically mentioned Jiang Hai. "This way, please." As soon as she heard Moses Adams' words, the saleswoman couldn't help but be stunned, but she quickly reacted and continued to smile, taking the two to the counter next to her. This is the Legacy series of Vacheron Constantin, and it is also the best watch we sell here recently. This series of watches ranges from thousands of dollars to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Many friends from Wuxia like this series very much. Our brand can also be regarded as one of the top in the world. In the 007 series, most of the watches of the male leads were sponsored by us. Looking at Jiang Hai, the saleswoman here began to talk non-stop. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai, who was still a little dazed, gradually recovered. Looking at the watch pointed by the woman, Jiang Hai glanced at it, but he was also shocked by what he saw. As expected of a luxury watch. This watch was really ridiculously expensive. It looked just like the Legacy series that the woman had just mentioned. Yes, there were cheap watches. The ones that cost $7,000 to $8,000 did not look good. A Vacheron Constantin that cost $7,000 to $8,000 did not look much different from the one sold on the streets. The only difference was that the watch was made with a hollow design. However, these watches were ridiculously expensive. The one that Jiang Hai had his eyes on had a price tag of $150,000. That was no joke. $150,000 was enough for him to buy 50 boats of cuttlefish. This price was really a little scary. Can I not buy this watch?" After hesitating for a moment, Jiang Hai looked at Moses Adams. He was a little reluctant to part with it. "How should I put it? Actually, it's fine. This is mainly up to you, boss. To be honest, whether you buy it or not is not a big problem for me. The main thing is not for tonight's operation. After all, one night is not worth more than $100,000. However, boss, don't you know that after the All-Star game, there will be an NBA cocktail party? There will be a lot of dignitaries at that party. Even if you don't want to have too much contact with these people, I remember that you said that you would come to New York in April to participate in the beef show. Sometimes, it is necessary to have some connections." Seeing Jiang Hai's reluctance, it was actually very difficult not to see it. Because right now, Jiang Hai's face was almost wrinkled into the word reluctance. Spending $100,000 to buy a useless watch. Jiang Hai was really speechless. But after hearing Moses Adams' words, Jiang Hai could not help but click his tongue. It was just as Moses Adams had said. When a person's fame had not reached a certain level, the strength of their clothing was also very important. At least it gave people the feeling that this guy was not trying to get something for nothing. Although Jiang Hai did not think that his beef would be sold out, he had many friends. However, he understood the problem of having more friends, more options. So, he was a little tempted by what Moses Adams said. If I don't buy it, I'll buy the best one. Miss, what's the most expensive watch you have? After struggling for a long time, Jiang Hai took a deep breath and cursed. Then, as if he had thought it through, he raised his head and spoke to the salesperson in front of him. Oh, the best watch we have is Patek Philippe. It is known as the blue-blooded aristocrat of watches. That's it. What's the most expensive one? Since he had already decided to spend money, Jiang Hai did not care about the price and directly asked. At present, in addition to the limited edition and special custom-made watches, the most expensive one is this series of men's watches with complex functions. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the salesperson here said with a serious face. Then he went to a counter next to him and took out a watch. Jiang Hai looked at it and his vision went a little dark because it was clearly marked 980,000, 98,000. It seems that the bragging has gone too far. Looking at the price and then at the small broken watch, Jiang Hai did not hear what the salesperson was explaining. What platinum dial? What nonsense? He did not understand. He just felt that his ears were ringing. His eyes were also staring at the watch. He could not see how this watch was valuable. Sir, are you sure you want this watch? Seeing that Jiang Hai's state was a little strange, the salesperson asked carefully. Yes. Listening to the salesperson's words, Jiang Hai took 3 deep breaths again. In the end, he almost gritted his back molar and used the strength of his teeth to force out the word he did not want to say from the bottom of his heart. At the same time he handed over the bank card. Okay, I'll wrap it up for you right away. This is my business card. If you have any questions or need any consultation, you can call the number on the card. I'm on 24 hours a day. The moment Jiang Hai handed over the card, all the female salespeople in the room looked at Jiang Hai differently. Especially this girl who almost swiped the card for Jiang Hai, filled in the form and so on. Finally, she handed over a personal business card and looked at Jiang Hai seriously and firmly. Chapter 156. Now that it's done, let's go eat. Returning to Moses Adams's car, Jiang Hai opened the gift box in his hand, then took out the watch inside and put it on his left wrist. As for the gift box, he was certainly reluctant to throw it away. He simply put it in the tidying box in front of the passenger seat. After listening to Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams started the car and winked at Jiang Hai. Of course, with such a watch, what kind of banquet can't you go to? Haha, in fact, boss, I think you don't have to care about the banquet. Didn't you see the look in the eyes of the waiters here just now? As long as you call this number tonight, I promise you will have a very happy night. What do you mean? Obviously, Jiang Hai was still too inexperienced. When he heard Moses Adams's words, he was stunned. What does this mean? Seeing Jiang Hai's appearance, Moses Adams also smiled. His boss is really inexperienced. It's very simple. Didn't the waitress just say that it's on 24 hours a day? She can explain the function of this watch to you on the spot. If you don't get anything tonight, then you can call her and tell her your room number. When a beauty comes, it's inevitable that she will have a meal, watch a movie, and then go back to your room to study the watch. It's almost very late. So late. It's not good to let a girl go back alone. Hearing Moses Adams say this, Jiang Hai immediately interrupted. I can send her back. But after Jiang Hai finished speaking, he was embarrassed. Looking at Moses Adams's slightly shocked face, Jiang Hai smiled embarrassedly. In fact, after he finished speaking, he understood what this guy meant. It's good that you understand. Haha, the specific operation still depends on the boss, but tonight you are the backup force. You can go all out and have fun. Looking at Jiang Hai, Moses Adams said earnestly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also bit his lip. His heart was really a little itchy. Okay, let's go, let's go. As Moses Adams honked the car horn, the car restarted. Then the two went back to the Hilton Hotel and had a simple dinner in the buffet restaurant there. They waited until 6 o'clock in the evening. When it was almost 7 o'clock, the two finished their meal and left the Hilton Hotel by car. This time, their destination was the Standard Hotel in the meatpacking area of New York's Lower City. Don't look at this 18-story hotel, which looks ordinary, but in fact, the top 2 floors of this hotel are the largest nightclub in New York, the Boom Room. Because the people who can come here to play, except for some young models who want to make a name for themselves, are either rich or noble. This is not like other nightclubs, where you can sneak in by having a good relationship with the security guard at the door. If you don't have an appointment, it is impossible to enter. But even if the 13 spaces here are high, when Jiang Hai appeared in front of the nightclub, he couldn't help but frown. It was not the first time that Jiang Hai went to a nightclub. When he was in China, he went in with his friends because of curiosity. But to be honest, Jiang Hai is not too interested in nightclubs. It is too noisy and the banging makes people feel very uncomfortable. Don't worry, this is the best. There are a variety of styles and there will always be something you like. Perhaps seeing that Jiang Hai was not interested in this place, Moses Adams, who was walking in front, said to Jiang Hai with a smile. I hope so. Shrugging, Jiang Hai said to Moses Adams. Then the two entered the nightclub through a special passage, but as soon as they came in, Jiang Hai heard the deafening loud music like other nightclubs, which made him frown. But since he was here, it would be unreasonable if he didn't experience it. He was still patient, enduring the thumping in his chest, and walked into the nightclub. As soon as he walked in, he saw a huge stage. The whole stage was T-shaped. At this time, a rock band was sweating hard on the stage, singing music that Jiang Hai found strange and noisy. Under the stage, countless white-collar workers who had nothing to do after work, or some people who came here purely to flirt and pick up girls, waved their arms and shouted loudly. At the back of the stage there was a girl dressed simply. She was standing in front of a DJ stand, sometimes flirting and sometimes waving her arms to liven up the atmosphere. There were also many tables and cages in all directions of the room. Inside these tables and cages, there was a girl standing or locked, dancing provocatively. The men below waved money and stuffed the money into their underwear or blouse to get a touch. The whole scene was annoying and extravagant, and Jiang Hai was a little excited. It's too noisy here. Forcibly pulling his gaze back from those simply dressed girls, Jiang Hai pulled the eager Moses Adams and shouted in his ear. Then let's go to the second floor. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, although Moses Adams now wanted to squeeze himself into the crowd and take advantage of those girls, maybe he could take two back tonight, but Jiang Hai was the boss. If he was not satisfied with this place, then he would not stay here. With great perseverance, he pulled back his gaze and led Jiang Hai to the second floor. When the two of them took the elevator to the second floor, Jiang Hai froze for a moment. This was because the second floor was completely different from the first floor. If the first floor was very dry and wild, then the second floor was very quiet. After getting out of the elevator on the second floor, they entered a passage. The entire second floor had only one color, gold. The entire passage was filled with golden mirrors. On both sides of the passage, there were women wearing all kinds of deep V-necks and all kinds of little dresses that exposed their arms and legs. They were talking and chatting here. Of course, there were also some men mixed in. He leaped over these figures and looked behind them. That was the hall. There was a huge triangular bathtub that was emitting steam, making the entire second floor look like a fairyland. It gave people a hallucinatory feeling. Just as Jiang Hai was looking around curiously, a girl who was closer to them came over with a smile and said to them, "Hello, do you two have an appointment?" This girl looked to be 25 or 26 years old. She was wearing a black deep V-neck dress. The opening almost reached her navel. It could be said that it was two pieces of cloth that wrapped her upper body from top to bottom. It could be clearly seen that she should be wearing nothing inside. Her lower body was also red, and she was wearing a pair of black high-heeled leather shoes. Her brown curly hair, coupled with heavy makeup, really gave people a sense of wild beauty. If some ordinary people can still be mixed in with the first floor, then the people who can go to the second floor are really rich. Hearing the girl's words, Moses Adams said with a chuckle, "I have an appointment in advance. My name is Moses Adams." After Moses Adams signed up, the girl in front of Jiang Hai touched her ear with her hand. Jiang Hai saw that there was a headset in the girl's ear. It seemed that she was confirming the identity of the two people. "Mr. Moses Adams, hello, the room you booked is here." After waiting for about a few seconds, the other party had already confirmed the room Moses Adams had booked. She smiled and led the two of them to a box in the distance. As soon as they walked in, Jiang Hai found that this box was really different because the floor of this box was actually transparent. They could clearly see the wild people on the first floor under their feet who were dancing there. But they could see these people, but they couldn't hear any sound. The effect of the compartment here was really good. Of course, if they want to listen, they can do it at any time because the floor can be adjusted. As long as there is a gap, the wild music below can go straight to the second floor, but Jiang Hai didn't want to listen to that music. "What do you two want to drink?" When Jiang Hai looked at his feet curiously, the girl who led them here was not polite at all. She sat directly next to Jiang Hai and Moses Adams and asked the two of them sweetly, "Boss, what do you want to drink?" Hearing the girl's question, Moses Adams also looked at Jiang Hai. Whatever, just give me a dozen beers." After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai recalled his impression of alcohol. It seems that in such a place full of 13 boxes, drinking beer is a bit degrading, but he is really not used to drinking foreign wine. "Well, a bottle of Hennessy, 3 dozen Corona, and the rest you can do as you see fit." Hearing Moses Adams's words, the girl couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. Although they didn't seem to have ordered a lot, the wine alone could be sold for thousands of dollars here. It seemed that the two of them didn't lack money. "Okay, I'll arrange it now." Hearing what Moses Adams said, the girl here also stood up, swaying her body, and walked out of the room. In less than 5 minutes, some waiters had already walked into the room with wine glasses, fruit plates, snacks, and so on, filling the small coffee table. Moses Adams didn't care at all. Picking up a piece of watermelon in front of him, Jiang Hai took a bite and asked Moses Adams, "This is the program you talked about?" "Boss, don't worry, the show is just about to start." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams also laughed. Just as he finished speaking, a female voice sounded from the door, "Hey handsome guys, can we come in and have a drink?" Chapter 157. Following the voice, Jiang Hai looked at the door, only to see that the originally empty door was surrounded by a group of girls after the wine was served. These girls were all wearing very simple clothes, almost similar to the woman who led them in just now. A lot of skin was exposed. Among these women there were obviously Caucasians, blondes, Latinos, blacks, and even Asians. One by one they stood outside the door and spoke to the two people in the room. "Welcome, my dear ladies." Hearing these girls' words, before Jiang Hai could react, Moses Adams had already stood up and walked to the door naturally. Then he reached out and put his arm around the shoulders of the two girls standing at the outermost side, leading them into the room. Originally, Jiang Hai was still wondering why they had such a big box with only the two of them. This box was indeed not small. According to the domestic KTV saying, this box was considered an extra-large box. The box had a huge bathroom, a row of huge sofas, and a huge TV screen. This TV screen could be set to singing mode, and it could also be used to watch TV. Of course, the people who came here to play were not here to sing or watch TV. The third function of this TV was to broadcast the performance below live. These girls had obviously been here for a long time. They were not unfamiliar with such a scene. After walking in with Moses Adams, they had already come to the sofa and sat down directly. Many people skillfully poured the wine in front of them or opened the beer. The sofa that Jiang Hai and Moses Adams were sitting on was still very big. At this time, after so many people squeezed in, it became a lot more crowded. Even the two girls beside Jiang Hai were firmly stuck to him. To be honest, this was Jiang Hai's first time encountering such a scene. From the corner of his eyes, he could clearly see that these girls were barely wearing very simple clothes, but their prominent vital parts were exposed. His nose also smelled the scent of various perfumes and body fragrances fused together. Their thighs and upper circumference filled his line of sight, so in an instant he became hard. Of course, it wasn't that his big brother was hard, but his body was hard. He now felt that his neck was going to have cervical spondylosis. Although it was impossible for him to get this disease since he got the Dragon Balls, he still felt that his neck was hard and painful. Bang 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 bang. At this moment, a girl also turned on the TV. It happened to be the live broadcast of the concert below. The harsh sound instantly entered Jiang Hai's mind and also relieved him from the original embarrassment. "Hey miss, please change the channel or lower the volume because my boss doesn't like this kind of music." Moses Adams may have remembered that Jiang Hai didn't like this kind of music, so when he heard this song, he struggled out of the gentle land and said to the girl over there. He said this very skillfully. First, he told these girls that Jiang Hai didn't like this. Second, he also told them that Jiang Hai was actually the big rich man here, not him. From the position of the sofa just now, it could be seen that many of these girls came for him, especially those white girls who were all gathered around him. Besides the Latino girls, there was only one Asian girl around Jiang Hai. It was not Moses Adams' style to ignore his boss like this. Hearing Moses Adams' words, these girls also looked at Jiang Hai. Their eyes were either surprised, or a little puzzled because they really didn't see any characteristics of a rich man from Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai also chuckled. Sure enough, girls love money. My dress is too ordinary. Hello, sir. Nice to meet you. My name is Maggie. The Asian girl next to Jiang Hai reacted faster. She smiled, picked up a bottle of beer and said to Jiang Hai with a smile. This Asian girl in Jiang Hai's eyes was very petite. She seemed to be more than 1.5 meters tall. With high heels she was only 1.6 meters tall. Her originally petite figure looked even more delicate next to these Caucasians. This girl was not like the Asian women that Europeans and Americans had in mind. They all looked like Hua Mulan in the cartoon. This girl was very much in line with the Asian aesthetic point of view. She had curly hair dyed blonde, big baby eyes, a sharp chin, a high nose, delicate skin, small lips and slightly thick lips. Jiang Hai did not know if she had gone under the knife, nor did he know what she looked like without her makeup, but purely based on her current appearance she was indeed not bad. Hello, you can call me Jiang. Jiang Hai naturally did not have stage fright when meeting with beautiful girls. He picked up the beer in front of him and clinked glasses with the other party. When Jiang Hai picked up the beer, the watch he had just bought on his left wrist was also revealed. As soon as they saw this watch, the eyes of these girls who hung out here all day long lit up instantly. Their eyes were very sharp, very sharp. Whether a piece of clothing or jewelry was real or not, they could tell at a glance. Jiang Hai's watch must be real. It seemed that Moses Adams' words just now were not just a compliment to Jiang Hai. It seemed that Jiang Hai was really a hot gold mine. Thinking of this, two girls smiled and walked to Jiang Hai's side. As for the other girls, they did not move because for them, although Jiang Hai was a gold mine after all, there was already someone sitting next to him. If they fell one step behind, it would be easy to fall behind. Instead of thinking about Jiang Hai's problem, they might as well continue to pursue Moses Adams. Moses Adams said that Jiang Hai was the boss mainly to make Jiang Hai more popular, but he was not ready to give up playing. It was naturally the best if someone stayed. Almost instantly, a certain balance was reached on the sofa. There were a total of 13 girls here. 7 were sitting on Jiang Hai's side at this time, and 6 were sitting on Moses Adams' side. It was a very suitable number. Jiang Hai was very passive in this regard and he did not know how to talk about this, but it did not matter if he did not know how. He just needed to show his financial resources because these girls naturally had a way to lead the topic. For example, the girl who had just drunk with Jiang Hai smiled and asked Jiang Hai, "Looking at you, you should be Asian. Which country are you from?" "Oh, I'm from Wuxia. What about you?" Hearing the girl's words, Jiang Hai asked curiously, "Wuxia, I'm from Japan. You don't hate me, right?" Hearing Jiang Hai say that he was from Wuxia, the girl's face showed a hint of surprise, and then whispered to Jiang Hai. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai was a little embarrassed. Although Jiang Hai was not a nationalistic youth, to be honest, a Wuxia man, especially a man from the northeast who did not hate Japanese people, but at this time in front of him was not a man, but a delicate beauty. Jiang Hai really did not know how to answer this question. By the way, are the cherry blossoms and Mount Fuji really beautiful in your country? Since this question was not easy to answer, Jiang Hai could only change the topic. It was not his turn to care about politics and national affairs. Of course, that's the beauty of our country. Are you interested in our country? How much do you know about Japan? When it came to her country, the girl also talked about it with a trace of pride on her face. To be honest, my understanding of your country is more about movies. Touching his nose, Jiang Hai said a little awkwardly. When she heard Jiang Hai's words, the girl pouted and looked at him with contempt. AI way is just AI way. Although I like my country very much, I know that our country's film industry is not very developed. Except for ghost movies, everything else is very average. You are a big man, it's impossible for you to like watching ghost movies. Tell me, which star do you like? Being exposed by a girl in front of his face, Jiang Hai was indeed a little embarrassed. But when this girl could face him and talk about AI way with him, Jiang Hai suddenly realized that he was still too naive. This wild world. He was somewhat unable to adapt, but he was now trying to adapt. I prefer Aoi and Porto. Oh, and Rio Tian Hai. The stewardess' surname is Aoi, so she should be called Aoi Sensei. She is indeed very powerful. Now she has many sales of her films, which can be ranked in the top 100 in the world. As for Porto, it's Porto no Yui. To be honest, in our country she is not very famous. She is mainly famous in Wuxia because she looks like a star in Wuxia. Tian Hai, her original figure wasn't that good. She only became famous after plastic surgery. As for Rio, I also like her a lot. She has a weak sexiness to her. I also watch her videos. I still have the newlyweds and campus beauty pageants on my computer, but she's going to retire this year. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl named Maggie didn't show any trace of shyness. Instead, she followed Jiang Hai and spoke with fervor and assurance. Jiang Hai was listening to her, and he was somewhat stunned. Maggie, I have always been curious. Don't mind me asking this. Are you Japanese women very open? This girl named Maggie was really good at talking, and she did not blush at all when talking about this topic. Taking advantage of the fact that she was a little thirsty and drinking, Jiang Hai also asked her. Because of the popularity of AI Ways movies, many people from different countries would have the same idea. However, this idea was wrong. She then said, there are two extremes. Some women are very open, some are very conservative, but the men are very open. This is because even if a man married to a conservative woman, he will still go out and mess around. Conservative women don't mind as long as they don't divorce and don't bring him home, it doesn't matter. For example, many of my friends in China put insurance in their husband's briefcase every day. If a man doesn't go out and mess around, he will be looked down upon by others. And if a wife has something to do back home, she will take the initiative to help her husband make an appointment. This is very common in China. This is very common. Wow, then you Japanese men are very happy. Hearing such an outrageous thing, Jiang Hai couldn't help but grin unconsciously. Recruiting by imperial decree, what a powerful nation. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Maggie shrugged and said indifferently, that's why I came to the United States. Clang. Just as Jiang Hai and the Japanese girl named Maggie were chatting happily, the door of their room was suddenly opened from the outside. A short blonde kid suddenly rushed in from the outside, holding a huge bottle of champagne in his hand. He shook it and shouted, "Wow, I'll treat you to a drink." As his voice fell, his fingers that were originally pressing on the mouth of the bottle instantly loosened, and then a column of champagne sprayed directly towards Jiang Hai, Moses Adams, and the girls. Chapter 158. Who the F*** CK? Looking at the champagne column coming towards him, Jiang Hai shouted for the first time. However, the strong physical fitness brought by the Dragon Ball was no joke. His brain hadn't reacted yet, but his body had already reacted at the first moment. He immediately threw himself to the side, but he forgot that there were many people sitting next to him. All of a sudden, he threw himself on the girl named Maggie who was chatting with him just now. Some of the girls next to him were also thrown down by Jiang Hai, but there was no way to stop the champagne from falling from the sky. At the critical moment, Jiang Hai's foot stepped on the ground. In an instant, the originally huge sofa was abruptly turned over by Jiang Hai's foot. This time, not only Jiang Hai but also the girls sitting on the sofa turned over with him. To be honest, these girls would rather be drenched by the champagne than be turned over like this. One must know that in order to create an atmosphere, the ground here was not covered with carpet, but with hard glass, in order to clearly see the activities on that floor. If they fell to the ground, although the glass would not be broken, it would definitely not feel good. So the moment they lost their center of gravity, these women screamed. Listening to this ear-piercing scream, Jiang Hai also reacted in an instant. He immediately supported himself with his palm and appeared under these women, using himself as a human cushion behind these women. Bang 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 for consecutive sounds, Jiang Hai also felt that 4 heavy objects were pressing on his body. And these women opened their eyes when they found that they didn't feel any ice or pain. As soon as they saw that Jiang Hai was under them, these women were also stunned for a moment. In fact, not only were they stunned now, Jiang Hai was also stunned. As mentioned before, the clothes these women wore were very simple clothes. Although their lower bodies were wearing underwear, their upper bodies were not. With such a big movement, several women's tops were off. Thinking about that kind of cloth top, if one was not careful, it would easily rub to the side. In an instant, a few inexplicable spots appeared in front of Jiang Hai. This. Looking at these people in front of him, Jiang Hai's pupils unconsciously dilated. At this time, these women also discovered that they seemed to be exposed, but among these 4 women, 2 were Latin American, and 1 was an American. They didn't seem to care very much. They even took the initiative to show their majestic existence to Jiang Hai. These women were not special workers, they were not professional workers. Their names were like models. If there were any comic conventions, game shows, car shows, and so on, they would also go to the stage or be a couple. Their main purpose was to promote themselves. Using their bodies to get to know more rich people, people in the entertainment circle, and even stars, this will be of great benefit to their future development. Maybe one day, when the hype is successful, they will no longer just rely on selling their bodies like now. It is very likely that they will also become artists and enter the upper class. And the simplest way for them to get to know these people is to rely on their bodies. It is precisely because of this that this nightclub has no restrictions on their entry and exit. Just like some gyms, if some beautiful women go to apply for a membership, there will always be a discount. There are also the signboards here. It can be said that both sides have a tacit understanding. Since they are sitting next to Zhanghai, naturally they also want to get close to Zhanghai and show their capital. This is nothing. Only the Japanese girl was shocked. She stood up immediately and wanted to tidy up her clothes. But she forgot that at this time, the champagne rain was still falling outside. As soon as she stood up, the guy at the door noticed her. In an instant, the champagne rain sprayed over, making her wet. After feeling the impact, she screamed again and squatted down, but unfortunately at this time she had already become a drowned rat. Her hair, clothes and makeup on her face were all messed up. Zhanghai was a little speechless, but he had to admit that this girl was very beautiful after putting on heavy makeup. Even if it was messed up now, he could see that her foundation was still very good. Cough, now is not the time to think about this. Damn it, you dare to show off in front of me, you're courting death. Listening to the guy at the door still howling there, Zhanghai's eyes flashed a fierce light. He was originally a pacifist, but since others came to find him, then he would not be polite. At this time the guy's main firepower was aimed at the other two sofas. Moses Adams and the others had not had time to dodge. This was an opportunity. Zhanghai jumped out from behind the sofa, then grabbed a fruit plate on the coffee table in front of him and threw it straight out like a disc. When the guy saw Zhanghai flash out, he also wanted to spray Zhanghai, but unfortunately his reaction was much slower than Zhanghai's. The fruit plate flew over and hit the guy's nose heavily before his champagne could turn around. There were 3 vital points on the human body. The first was the nose. After being hit, the person would feel dizzy, his nose would ache and tears would flow. When the guy was hit by Zhanghai's fruit plate, he immediately gave up the champagne in his hand and hugged his nose with both hands. "Ow, who is it, my nose?" While he was screaming, Zhanghai had already flashed in front of him. Without saying a word, he kicked the guy directly in the chest. The guy didn't even have time to react. To be exact, he didn't even have time to wipe his tears before he was kicked out of the private room by Zhanghai. He flew straight to the mirror in the corridor opposite the private room. With a loud bang, the huge golden mirror was also full of cracks from the guy's impact. "Boss." At this time, the 2 men in black outside the door were also very surprised when they saw the guy flying out. They ran over immediately wanting to see if the guy was okay. At this time Zhanghai also walked out of the room. "Sir, don't move." Seeing Zhanghai coming over, one of the big men stood up in an instant and stood in front of Zhanghai. His eyes stared at Zhanghai. They all saw that their boss flew out of the room. Needless to say, he was beaten out and now this man was very suspicious. "Ah, my nose, my chest, damn it, damn it, damn it, who is it, you damn guy, you dare to hit me, teach him a lesson for me." At this time the man who was just beaten out by Zhanghai also recovered. He covered his nose with one hand and his chest with the other. He shouted angrily at Zhanghai in front of him. Hearing his roar, Zhanghai snorted coldly, then glanced at the 2 bodyguards. Judging from the size of these 2 guys and the murderous aura emitted from their bodies from time to time, these 2 should be soldiers and have seen blood. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to become this guy's bodyguards. However, compared with Bell and Zhanghai's manner, they were still far behind, let alone him. Zhanghai was confident that if these 2 guys dared to move, then he would tell them why the flowers were so red. But unfortunately, these 2 people didn't give Zhanghai such an opportunity. One of them still stood in front of Zhanghai, just on guard but didn't intend to make a move. The other one squatted beside the man. "Boss, we are your bodyguards, not your thugs." Listening to the man's words, the man squatting there said coldly. Hearing what this man said, the guy who was still rolling on the ground couldn't help but grit his teeth. These bodyguards are really disobedient. What's wrong, what's wrong? At this moment, a fat middle-aged white man ran in from the outside with a group of security guards. As soon as he saw the tense situation and the man lying on the ground, he took out the handkerchief in his pocket and wiped his sweat. "It's this guy again. To be honest, this fat man really doesn't like him. Hey George, this guy hit me, he hit me. Is there no law here, he dared to hit me." Seeing the fat man coming over, the man lying on the ground couldn't help but shout loudly. "Our boss hit you? That's right, we can even kill you. You ran into our box for no reason and sprayed champagne on us. Don't talk about hitting you, even if we beat you to death you can see if the police will sentence us." Hearing his roar, Moses Adams, who was in the room at this time, also walked out while wiping his wet hair and said angrily. In fact, no one would be happy if a guy suddenly sprayed champagne on them when they were still flirting with the girls in the room. Moses Adams is naturally such a person. "I was treating you to a drink. I said it the first time I went in that I was treating you to a drink. You didn't thank me and you even hit me. Do you have any shame? Hearing Moses Adams' words, the man lying on the ground slowly stood up with the help of his bodyguard. He grinned and pretended to be angry as he roared. I'm treating you to a drink. Who needs your treat? Besides, your attitude of treating others to a drink is to directly spray champagne on them. If that's the case, then I was treating you to fruit just now. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai directly retorted without saying a word, then pointed to the broken fruit plate on the ground and said to the man with disdain. What did you say, you damn guy? George, he hit me. He actually hit me. How can your nightclub let such a guy in? I'm your VIP, do you understand? Hearing Jiang Hai directly return his words to him, the man was also a little angry. He knew that he couldn't get through to Jiang Hai, so he could only put pressure on the fat manager over there. F***ck your father, this is the manager, right? I also want to get an answer, why can this guy enter our box? Jiang Hai raised a middle finger to the crazy guy, then turned to the fat man and said coldly. Chapter 159. The fat boss knew this better than anyone else. There was a saying in the United States, if you love him, please let him go to New York. It's heaven there. If you hate him, please let him go to New York. It's hell there. This nightclub was the intersection between heaven and hell. Although the boss behind this nightclub was very powerful, the power of the nightclub didn't represent the power of the fat man. At least he couldn't afford to offend anyone who came here. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, the fat man couldn't help but wipe his sweat more diligently. He was too lazy to pay attention to the kid over there. Instead, he walked to Jiang Hai's side and said to Jiang Hai with a smile, it's all a misunderstanding, all a misunderstanding. We're all here to have fun. There's no need to be so hostile. Sir, you see, this guy is also a star and you did indeed kick him. If it really gets out of hand, this matter won't be easy to handle. How about we make a small deal out of it? Let's just treat it as making a friend. I'll pay all your expenses tonight, you see? But before he could finish his words, Jiang Hai's hand was already raised, interrupting his words. Do I lack your money? I'm asking you what to do about this matter, not for you to stir up trouble. This. Although he knew that the guests here weren't to be trifled with, when he saw the watch on Jiang Hai's wrist, he understood that this guy really wasn't someone he could afford to offend because he really didn't lack money. How could he afford to offend someone who could wear nearly $1 million on his wrist? Jiang Hai didn't know that the watch he bought was quite useful. Not only was it useful for flirting with girls, but it was also useful for socializing. You don't have to talk to me about this and that. You're a star. You're probably doing this to become famous. I'll fulfill your wish. Moses, call the police, Jiang Hai said with a wave of his hand and pointed at the guy who had just stood up. I need fame, you guy. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the kid seemed to have been greatly insulted. He almost jumped up, pointed at Jiang Hai and shouted. Jiang Hai listened to him and just gently picked his ear. This guy is Justin Bieber. Seeing Jiang Hai's disdainful look, Moses Adams hesitated for a moment, then walked in front of Jiang Hai and whispered to him. Although he was very angry at this time, his cold-blooded lawyer side had awakened. He walked to Jiang Hai's side and whispered in Jiang Hai's ear. Justin Bieber, I seem to have an impression of him. The one who sang Baby, right? Weren't you kicked out of the United States? Why are you still here? Hearing Moses Adams's words, Jiang Hai snorted disdainfully. He didn't know much about stars, but this guy really didn't need fame. His fame in music and private life was enough. Seeing that Jiang Hai knew about him, this guy didn't say much. After all, he was a public figure. As for the deportation that Jiang Hai mentioned, there was indeed a commotion last year because his influence was too bad. He got into fights, posted those kinds of photos, smashed his neighbor's door, took drugs and so on. Could be said that he was definitely the worst idol. Recently, his master, Arthur, had been telling him to disappear for a while and not get caught by the police again. He couldn't do anything good, but he couldn't do anything bad either. Although the United States government wouldn't come out and ban a Canadian like him from coming to the United States because it might irritate the Canadians, the government still had to listen to the opposition of the people. If they really did something, it would be really difficult. Therefore, recently, other than occasionally exposing news, he didn't do anything else. The reason he came here today was mainly because he had the same goal as Jiang Hai. He came to watch the All-Star game. He was also a hardcore basketball fan. Even the starting point guard of the Eastern Conference this year, the former Rockets player Kyle Lowry, was able to become a starter in the All-Star game thanks to him. If he was taken away by the police again at this time, Although he would only be drunk and wouldn't be sentenced, his influence on the public would still be very bad. At the very least, he wouldn't be able to watch the NBA All-Star game. Thinking about this, he couldn't help but have a headache. But for someone like him, his greatest ability was to be able to adapt. As the saying goes, a wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. After his mind gradually calmed down, he knew that if he really wanted to fight with Jiang Hai, it would really be very troublesome. So, admitting defeat now might be a good choice. Thinking of this, his eyes turned and he said to Jiang Hai with a smile, "What happened just now was my fault. I'm sorry, we all came out to play, there's no need to be so stiff. I was wrong, I'm sorry, I apologize to you, and your expenses tonight will be mine." "Tonight's expenses will be mine." No. I just said that this gentleman's expenses will be mine. Mine. Hearing Justin Bieber's words, the fat manager also said with a smile. This guy was indeed an artist. His reaction was fast. It was better to cover up such a scandal. After all, reputation was very important to the nightclub and him. No, then I have to give something. It's not about money. I'm apologizing. Seeing the fat manager shift the expenses to his side, his eyes quietly rolled and then he said with a smile. It was said that it was difficult to slap a smiling face. Since this guy had admitted defeat, Jiang Hai was honestly at a loss. After all, even if we call the police, he will only spray wine into the room. At most, we will be fined some money and his reputation will be damaged. Moreover, you hit him, so even if we call the police, it won't be of much use. It won't do us any good. Most importantly, his reputation has already been ruined, so it won't make a difference. Why don't we just forget about it? Just as Jiang Hai was hesitating, Moses Adams walked to Jiang Hai's side and whispered in Jiang Hai's ear. Indeed, what Justin Bieber did was at most a scandal. It was not to the extent that he should be locked up or sentenced. Spraying alcohol on others was really not a big deal. So after hearing Moses Adams's words, Jiang Hai also knew that this matter was probably over. "Are you okay?" Taking a deep breath, Jiang Hai looked at the two men unhappily and turned to look at Moses Adams. When Moses Adams heard Jiang Hai's words, to be honest, he was a little touched. To put it bluntly, lawyers like them were lackeys of the rich. They wanted to live, be famous and make money, so they could not do without the rich. It was not that there were no lawyers who only helped the poor, but such people were destined to not make much money. Those cases of asset mergers and acquisitions, cases with the government, and cases with other companies, which one of them was not thick and dark. No one's ass was clean. It depended on who could find more loopholes and be more ruthless to gain more benefits. Therefore, for Moses Adams' employers, the only thing they cared about was whether or not he could gain more benefits for themselves. Unlike Jiang Hai, they would still pay attention to his thoughts, his heart, and whether or not he felt wronged. "I'm fine." But after all, he was not a rookie who had just entered society. The moment Moses Adams was touched, he suppressed this mentality and then smiled at Jiang Hai, indicating that he was fine. Since he said that he was fine, Jiang Hai did not say anything and went straight to the fat manager. "Give us another private room." "I want the same clean one," Jiang Hai said word by word as he looked at the manager. "No problem, this way please." Although the private rooms here needed to be reserved, today's incident was indeed a little sudden. Since Jiang Hai was willing to take a step back, the fat manager here naturally had the mentality of making peace. He immediately took Jiang Hai and his group to another room. Jiang Hai's side dishes were all replaced with new ones, and there were even more side dishes. At the same time, there was an extra bottle of red wine. This wine was sent by Justin Bieber, but it was sent by the bodyguard. Although he admitted defeat, Jiang Hai knew that he was not necessarily so willing. But it did not matter. Jiang Hai was not willing to give up. After this incident, the 13 beauties who were originally in the room were also frightened. In the end, there were only 2 people left here. Moses Adams did not care about the wine stains on his body. For him, after going back, he would send it for dry cleaning anyway. He sat directly on the sofa and flirted with the girl who stayed. As for the other girl who stayed, it was the Japanese girl named Maggie. She was also frightened just now. "Can you accompany me to the bathroom? I need to wash up." After this incident, the originally lively scene became much colder in an instant. Sitting on the sofa, Jiang Hai and Maggie also did not know what to say. Compared with the old fox Moses Adams, Jiang Hai was much more inexperienced. He sat there drinking beer helplessly. Fortunately, Maggie was very experienced. She stuck to Jiang Hai's side and whispered in Jiang Hai's ear. "Cough, I'll go with you?" Pointing to himself, Jiang Hai asked in disbelief. "Let's go." Seeing Jiang Hai's surprised and incredulous look, Maggie chuckled and pulled Jiang Hai into the bathroom in the private room. Seeing Jiang Hai's action, Moses Adams on the other side also let out a strange cry. Originally he was just rubbing his hands on his legs, but after Jiang Hai left, he also went deeper inside. However, Jiang Hai did not see this scene because after he walked into the bathroom, he felt even more embarrassed. Now he did not know whether it was because of the wine or other reasons, but he felt that his face was as hot as a fever. Chapter 160. Wow, this guy is crazy. I'm covered in wine. My whole body is a little sticky. It would be great if I could take a shower now, but there's no other way. Let's take a shower first. Compared to Jiang Hai's helplessness, Maggie here was more active. After entering the bathroom, she turned on the tap on the table in front of her, adjusted the warm water, and washed her face first. Now her face was covered in wine and makeup to a certain extent. Instead of this, it was better to just wash it off directly. Jiang Hai stood behind her and looked at the tight skirt. When she bent down, the curve of the skirt stretched out and vaguely saw her breasts. This made Jiang Hai feel a little thirsty, but there was no wine here and he couldn't drink water, so he could only endure. He forcibly turned his gaze away and began to look at the bathroom. This bathroom was not big, but it was understandable. After all, it was just a bathroom in a private room. The whole bathroom was only divided into two parts. One was the toilet and the other was the sink. Although there were not many things, the place was not small and it was very spacious. Just as Jiang Hai was looking here, he felt a flash in front of his eyes. The next second, Maggie, who had already removed her makeup, stood in front of him. It was not like before when she accidentally exposed herself and screamed in surprise. Instead, she took the initiative to take off her outer skirt. As she took it off, she said to Jiang Hai, "Can you help me get my clothes?" "Oh, okay." Sure enough, when she took off her clothes, Jiang Hai saw a pair of things that he hadn't seen for a long time, jumping into his line of sight. Don't look at Maggie's height, only a little more than 1.5 meters, but her upper body is still very amazing. The arc is so strong that it makes people's hair stand on end. Feeling Jiang Hai's gaze, Maggie did not make any shy movements. She took off her outer skirt, leaving only a pair of purple-red lace translucent panties on her body. Jiang Hai even saw that in the translucent panties she deliberately trimmed her hair. This caused Jiang Hai's throat to swallow his saliva even faster. However, Maggie acted as if she didn't see Jiang Hai's actions. While washing her body, she said to Jiang Hai, "I hate getting wine all over my body. It smells bad and it's very uncomfortable. By the way, can I go to the bathroom?" Jiang Hai didn't know how to respond when he saw her completely disregard the fact that her soft spot was distorted after being squeezed. All he could do was nod. Then she took some tissue and wiped her body. Then she walked past Jiang Hai and sat on the toilet. She completely disregarded the fact that Jiang Hai was still beside her. Just like that, she took off her last layer of defense. Not long after, there was the sound of water splashing. Her face revealed a hint of relief. Phew, this is the only bad thing about drinking beer. It's too easy to go to the toilet. Don't you want to go to the toilet? I see that you've drunk a lot of them. After solving her problem, Maggie didn't rush to stand up. Instead, she asked Jiang Hai curiously. I don't have one for the time being." Hearing Maggie's words, Jiang Hai didn't know what to say. Hearing Jiang Hai say that he didn't have one, Maggie showed a look of disbelief and said, "You don't have one? I don't believe it." She stretched out her hand directly and pressed on Jiang Hai's vital part. Jiang Hai wanted to dodge, but after all, he was shocked. He didn't have time to dodge and was pressed on his pants. Then Maggie's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. "Wow, so big. I heard that men don't go to the toilet when they're doing it. How about I help you?" Maggie squinted her eyes and smiled, saying to Jiang Hai, "No, don't bother." Hearing Maggie's words, Jiang Hai really didn't know what to say now. However, Maggie didn't give him a chance to refuse. She directly pulled his clothes and pulled him in front of her. Looking at the nervous Jiang Hai, Maggie's eyes also curved into two crescent moons. "Hee, you're welcome. I still have to tell you later. If you are so nervous and uncomfortable now, how are you going to spend the night?" Listening to Maggie's explicit words, Jiang Hai, who was originally embarrassed to the point of wanting to retreat, suddenly stopped. While Jiang Hai hesitated, Maggie had already unbuttoned Jiang Hai's pants and released a behemoth from the black boxers. Originally, Jiang Hai's size was just the same as the size of an ordinary Wuxia person. It was 16 centimeters long and 2.5 fingers wide, but since he got the Dragon Balls, his big brother seemed to be undergoing a second development. Unknowingly it has grown to 3 fingers wide. Although the width didn't grow much, the length has reached 23 centimeters. Even compared with some North Americans, Jiang Hai's behemoth is definitely a behemoth. It wouldn't be a problem for him to shoot a movie. Wow, it's a little scary. Looking at the behemoth that popped out, Maggie was also shocked. Then her eyes lit up, and her 2 small hands unknowingly climbed on the monster's body, then she licked her lips gently and sent it up. Hiss, this won't do. I've never done this before. The instant feeling made Jiang Hai's nerves tense up. Now his waist is a little numb. He knew that this is not good news, so he couldn't help but say immediately. But hearing Jiang Hai's words, Maggie didn't stop, but continued to move, and while moving she said vaguely, "It doesn't matter as long as you are happy, I don't hate this." Hearing Maggie say so, Jiang Hai didn't refute, but began to enjoy this feeling. He hasn't touched a woman for several years, so this time he endured to the limit, but he only endured for 5 minutes before he was defeated. But although it was fast, after it was over, it was still as hard as iron, which also made Maggie have the idea to discuss it further. But if they discuss it further, they can't discuss it in the bathroom. After the 2 of them put on their clothes, they left the bathroom. But when they came into the private room, they found that Moses Adams had already left, and just now Jiang Hai received a message from him on his mobile phone, telling Jiang Hai that he went back to the hotel first. The 2 of them had a tacit understanding. At that moment, Jiang Hai also left the nightclub with Maggie, went out, took a taxi and returned to the hotel. After entering the hotel, the 2 of them could finally take a good shower. As for the clothes they changed out of, naturally the hotel waiter would take them to dry clean. What happened next was naturally more exciting than in the bathroom. In accordance with the principle of not describing anything above holding hands, it was just a brief description. When Jiang Hai woke up the next morning, he felt that this was the most comfortable night he had slept in the past 2 years. This was not to say how much he loved the woman in his arms, or how many women he had in his arms, but it was the first time he hugged something to sleep. Well, after being a dog for a long time, it was really exciting to be a human once in a while. Although the 2 of them didn't seem to have much of a story to continue, really, it seemed that the 2 of them didn't have any follow-up story. Early the next morning, Jiang Hai and Maggie had a meal. The 2 of them exchanged phone numbers and then the girl left. She didn't ask for a penny from Jiang Hai, nor did she have any other requests. After all, she didn't specialize in this. It turned out that she still enjoyed this night. Moreover, the breakfast was paid for by Jiang Hai, so they just exchanged phone numbers and left. As for Jiang Hai, after breakfast, he followed the similarly refreshed Moses Adams to the place that sold airplanes that American Express had introduced to him a while ago. This place was a special exhibition hall in the urban area. It was not much different from the exhibition hall of a 4S store. It was just that the cars were replaced with airplanes. However, buying airplanes was not buying cars after all. Airplanes took up too much space and it was impossible to line them up in a row for you to choose. So basically, these places that sold airplanes only had about 10 or 8 of the more popular ones parked there. However, there would be more helicopters parked there. If you had special requirements to buy airplanes, you also needed to make an appointment in advance. In fact, most of the airplanes placed here were either in stock or had been ordered by the customer. Before the customer took them away, they were placed here to keep up appearances. Although it was Jiang Hai's first time buying this thing, it wasn't Moses Adams's first time. On the way, Moses Adams also asked Jiang Hai what kind of plane he wanted to buy. When he heard that Jiang Hai wanted to buy an AT-802F, he nodded gently. Jiang Hai's manner was not small, so it was suitable to buy an airplane. When they arrived at the place where they bought the plane, there was already a service staff waiting for them. Since Jiang Hai had already decided what kind of plane he wanted to buy, there was no need to talk nonsense. There was cash for the AT-802F here and Jiang Hai could just go and see it. The price of this AT-802F is $460,000. If you want to buy a farm machine, you can enjoy a certain discount, but you have to pay for it first. It will only be reduced when you pay the tax. Jiang Hai and Moses Adams looked at the big guy in front of them. Even Jiang Hai could not help but let out a soft, "Oh." The things made by different countries all had their own special features. For example, no matter what the Russians made, there was only one word to describe it: big and then sturdy. In Europe, the things made by France were only 2 words to describe it: good-looking but not practical, and whether it was sturdy or not was another matter. Looking good was the most important thing. The things made by the British were only 2 words to describe it: grand. They wanted to show the spirit of the world's overlords. The things made by the Germans were strict but not good-looking. The things made by the Italians were weird, not suitable for the battlefield, not practical, but very much in line with the taste of the fashion world. As for the things made by the Americans, well, they could be capricious because no one knew what the next thing they would make would be. Think about the P-47 and the F-22. In fact, the people of the Americans were the most unpredictable. As for Wuxia, the main thing is that they will build whichever country they like. Chapter 161. Height 4. 12 meters, length 12. 3 meters, wingspan 20 meters. Although he already knew the specific data of this behemoth, Jiang Hai still felt a little nervous. This is an airplane. He really didn't think that one day he would be able to afford this thing. Licking his dry lips, Jiang Hai looked at the salesperson beside him. I want this airplane, but I also need a helicopter. Is there anything you can recommend? This airplane's empty weight alone is more than 3 tons. If it flies around, just the cost of diesel alone is not less than the money Jiang Hai earns when he goes fishing. Therefore, this airplane is destined to only fly once every few days, mainly to spread medicine and bait. As for patrols and the like, it is cheaper to use a helicopter, and the price of this thing is not expensive. Oh, there are also many brands of helicopters. If you are using it in the manner, a single-engine helicopter is enough. Of course, if you want to buy more, we are also very welcome. We will give you a satisfactory discount. Hearing that Jiang Hai also needs a helicopter, the salesperson's face suddenly brightened up. This is good news. If you talk about helicopters, the best is naturally the Bell series. This kind of helicopter has a large interior, a wide range of uses and a wide variety. Even if you drive it out, you won't lose face. If you don't like the Bell series and feel that it is a little silly, the Hummingbird series is also not bad. There are also Enstrom, Robinson, McDowell, EC, Schwarzer, Sikorsky. We even have Wuxia, Air China, Zhejiang Red Eagle and Hafei. We have all of them here. Hafei. Hearing this person's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. He really didn't expect to see a domestic airplane here. There has always been a rumor that domestic engines are not good enough. It is difficult to make cars, let alone airplanes. How can there be domestic airplanes in the United States now? Although he wants to make a sample of domestic airplanes, to be honest, he is not confident in his heart. Hafei, it's true. Yes, Hafei. To be honest, Chinese products are very reliable, especially foreign exchange products. I'm not saying this just because you are Chinese. This Hafei helicopter is indeed not bad. It's a light aircraft with a length of 13.012 meters, a height of 3.14 meters, a rotor diameter of 10.69 meters, an empty weight of 1180 kilograms, a takeoff weight of 2 tons, and a maximum takeoff weight of 2 tons. Its cruising speed is 220 to 240 kilometers per hour, and its maximum cruising distance is 560 kilometers per hour, and its endurance is 3.7 hours. This is a pretty good standard. Look at Bell 206, which is about the same price as this one. No matter if it's Type A, Type B, or Type C, they are all smaller than this one. The largest Type C only has a takeoff weight of 1814 kilograms, and a flying speed of 225 kilometers per hour. Its only advantage is that it can cruise a little more than 620 kilometers. But to be honest, you are going to patrol the fishing grounds and it's so close to the fishing grounds. Is there a big difference between the 60 kilometers route and the fishing route? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the salesman also spoke. Sure enough, Jiang Hai picked up the list handed over by the salesman. He looked at it. Sure enough, the Bell 206, which was known as the seller of helicopters, had a total of 3 types. The cheapest Type A was $800,000, and the most expensive Type C was $1,200,000. This helicopter was even more expensive than fixed-wing aircraft. Of course, there were also cheaper ones. The cheapest type was the Bell 47, which could be bought for more than $60,000. But Jiang Hai didn't like it because it was too ugly. Moreover, this helicopter only had a maximum takeoff weight of 1,340 kilograms, a maximum horizontal flight speed of 169 kilometers per hour, a range of 402 kilometers and only 4 seats. This was the most economical and practical helicopter. However, after Jiang Hai saw the Bell 206 and Hafei's helicopter, he had no interest in this. Then he looked at Hafei's helicopter. Sure enough, except for the maximum range, which was 60 kilometers shorter than the Type 206C, the rest of the models were all in red. Moreover, it was cheaper than the Type 206C at only $650,000. Although it was still more expensive than a fixed-wing aircraft, it was still within Jiang Hai's acceptable range. The most important thing was that Jiang Hai saw the name of this helicopter, ZHI-11. CKG-11. When he saw the pinyin, Jiang Hai cursed subconsciously. "Sir, do you know this helicopter?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the salesman was stunned for a moment and asked curiously. "Of course I know. This is it." Although Jiang Hai was not a military fan, he used to be a netizen. How could he not know about the famous G-11? This was the ambitious work of Wuxia Airlines. On some iron-blooded military websites, it was even called the most powerful armed helicopter that could challenge the Apache. It was a pure military product. Perhaps in China, some civilian manufacturers might not be very reliable, but Jiang Hai had never heard of anything that was not reliable. Since he had encountered it now, it was absolutely impossible for him not to buy it. Since he had already decided, Jiang Hai did not say anything more. He directly placed the order and paid the deposit. Next, he only needed to wait for these 2 helicopters to be delivered to his manor and let Bell and Marin Rupert inspect them. Then he could pay the rest of the money. After solving a major problem in his heart, Jiang Hai was officially relieved. After coming out of this exhibition hall, he and Moses Adams were not in a hurry to go back. Instead, they took a good look around the world's largest city. Anyway, they had nothing else to do today. Although Jiang Hai had been in the United States for some time, he was not optimistic about the tourism industry here. But since he came here, he had to leave some marks. After they came out, they went to see the Statue of Liberty, then went to see Ground Zero. The so-called Ground Zero refers to the ruins of the World Trade Center that collapsed after September 11th. But now it had become an open space. In the middle of the open space, there was a sign that said, "We will never forget." It could be seen that this incident was really an indelible mark for the people of the United States. Then they went to Lanark Square, which was actually the New York Times Square. Of course, in China it was more translated as New York Times Square, but it really had nothing to do with the Times. At most, there would be a lot of people waiting to ring the bell every year during the New Year. After visiting here, they went back to Fifth Avenue where they went yesterday. But today they did not come here to buy things. They came here to have fun. The Empire State Building, the Public Library, Rockefeller Center, and Central Park. Jiang Hai came here today to visit all of them. In fact, he only visited half of them. Because there were many art museums and galleries near Central Park, it was almost like playing the lute to a cow. So, Jiang Hai just looked outside and gave up the idea of going in. With his temperament, he was destined to have no fate with art. It was better not to look at things that were full of 13 boxes. After visiting these attractions, it was already night time. Before inviting Moses Adams to the subway station in Flushing, they had an authentic barbecue. After that, Moses Adams took Jiang Hai to Broadway to watch an opera. They slept in an opera. He was really not interested in this kind of thing, but today he was very happy. After all, they came out to have fun. Happiness was the most important thing. After he and Moses Adams returned to the hotel in the evening, he went to take a shower first. Then he took out the business card that the girl gave him when he bought the watch yesterday. According to Moses Adams, if he did not take advantage of this, he would be punished by God. Jiang Hai was a person who respected ghosts and gods the most. He was very afraid of God's punishment, so he took advantage of this opportunity. Originally, the girl thought that Jiang Hai, her sugar daddy, would not reply. After receiving the call, she was very excited. That night, she went to Jiang Hai's room. After having a midnight snack with him, she carefully explained the function of this watch to him. In the end, Jiang Hai still only understood the date and the normal time. He still did not understand the rest, and he was not willing to understand. Compared to the watch, he was more willing to understand the girl's own depression. After a process that could not be described in words, it was February 13th. Of course, this referred to the American time. In the distant Wuxia, it was already February 14th today. For Jiang Hai, getting up with different girls in the morning was something that he did not even dare to think about before. Of course, he would not always think about this in the future. He was now giving himself a vacation. When he returned to the manor, he probably would not think about it anymore. In the morning, after eating breakfast with the girl, he specially took her out for a walk. This girl was different from Maggie. Maggie was a simple one-night stand, but this girl didn't leave in the morning. If she didn't get something, she wouldn't leave so easily. In fact, for such an obvious effect, Jiang Hai still liked it very much because it was not troublesome. After the two separated at noon, Jiang Hai returned to the hotel because that night was the first day of the All-Star weekend. That night, one of the preliminaries for the All-Star game, the Celebrity Challenge, would be held at 7 p.m. The Rookie Challenge would be held at 9 p.m. Tomorrow at 7:30 p.m., the All-Star Weekend would officially begin. The shooting star, skills competition, three-point competition, and slam dunk competition would all be held tomorrow. Of course, the venue was different. Although the competition would start at Madison Square Garden, today's and tomorrow's competitions would be held at the Nets' home court, Brooklyn's Barclays Center. Although the NBA's influence in the United States was not as big as football or baseball, it was only slightly stronger than ice hockey. But after all, it was one of the 4 major leagues in the United States. In addition, tomorrow was Valentine's Day. The atmosphere of the All-Star Game and Valentine's Day pushed New York to its peak. Jiang Hai had lived for so long, but this was the first time he felt so good. Chapter 162. Phew, I'm a little nervous. With a ticket in his hand, Jiang Hai came to the first row of the basketball team's Barclays Arena. His eyes were also looking around. He was so nervous that his palms were sweating. He kept wiping them on his pants. As for Moses Adams, although his seat was next to Jiang Hai, he was still a lawyer. Even though he had a good personal relationship with Jiang Hai, he still knew a lot of people. As soon as he entered, he greeted everyone. On the other hand, Jiang Hai came to sit here first. Although he had the ticket in his hand, it was his first time sitting here. He was a little scared. Hey, is this your first time watching a game live? Just as Jiang Hai's eyes were looking around, a white man walked over from a distance with a smile and sat next to Jiang Hai. This guy looked a little older than Jiang Hai, but not by much. The clothes he wore were not much different from the other fans. He was also wearing the uniform of this year's Western Conference All-Star. However, what surprised Jiang Hai was that he was fully armed. The weather outside was very cold, so he was not afraid of freezing. Yeah, it's my first time watching a game so close. He was embarrassed to say that he had never watched an NBA game before. He could only find an excuse and say that it was his first time watching a game so close. Haha, then let's enjoy it. The All-Star Game is not for you to be nervous. It's for you to have fun. The man patted Jiang Hai's shoulder and laughed. When he heard his words, Jiang Hai's original nervousness relaxed a little. You're from Wuxia? Seeing Jiang Hai's expression, he relaxed a little. The man did not hold back and sat directly next to Jiang Hai. Yes. Jiang Hai was a little surprised to hear that he was from Wuxia because in the United States, although the proportion of Chinese people was the largest among all the Asians, when an American asked where an Asian came from, they would mostly say Japan or Korea, and rarely would they ask if he was from Wuxia. Although he had no love for these two countries, the attitude of these two countries towards outsiders was still very worthy of recognition. At least it gave others a feeling that they were very polite. Oh, I've been to Wuxia where I rose. I've been to Taiwan province there. Are you from there? Hearing that Jiang Hai really came from Wuxia, the white man also became enthusiastic. No, Tai province is the southern tip of Wuxia. I'm from the northernmost city. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai said to the man. Oh, that's a pity, but Tai province is really fun. There are a lot of delicious food there. The climate is average, too hot, but the girls are very enthusiastic and their voices are very fun. Hearing that Jiang Hai was not from Tai province, the man was a little disappointed, but then he put it behind him and began to talk to Jiang Hai about Tai province. But speaking of Tai province, Jiang Hai has never been to Tai province. Hey Para, it's time to warm up. Just as the man and Jiang Hai were chatting happily, a black man shouted at the guy in the distance. Hearing this voice, the white man also stood up. Are you going to play in the game? Seeing that this guy was really going to warm up, Jiang Hai was also a little curious. Yeah, after chatting for so long we can be considered friends. Remember to cheer for me later. Seeing Jiang Hai's curious gaze, the guy couldn't help but say proudly. Then he quickly ran to the court and did a warm-up shot. At this time, Moses Adams finally finished greeting and sat back next to Jiang Hai. Looking at the white man, he was obviously stunned. He looked at Jiang Hai and asked curiously, Do you know Robert Para? Robert Para? Who is that? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai thought about it carefully. It seems that he doesn't know this person. It's the guy who talked to you just now. He's the owner of the Grizzlies, Robert Para, the most eligible bachelor in the IT industry. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams couldn't help but complain in his heart. You don't know him, why are you chatting so happily with him? Seeing Moses Adams's expression, Jiang Hai smiled a little awkwardly. It's better to have someone to chat with than to sit here alone. However, after hearing Moses Adams's words, he still took out his phone to check. In the end, Jiang Hai was also shocked by the results. This Robert Para was really a powerful person. Compared to Jiang Hai who had a cheat, this man rose to prominence with his own ability. This man was born in 1977, only 11 years older than Jiang Hai. In 2003 he joined Apple as a hardware engineer and was responsible for the work related to the Wi-Fi base station. He resigned in 2005 and used $30,000 as startup capital to make a sample in his apartment. It was a classic example of an empty-handed person. With this sample and a website, he received 3,000 pre-ordered systems and an advance payment of $240,000. Then he flew to Taiwan province and found a hardware company there to make his current main product, a wireless network device named Ubi. After listing on NASDAQ in 2011, it was out of control. Now his net worth was as high as $9.2 billion. He was a famous eligible bachelor in the United States. When Jiang Hai saw this number he was shocked. $9.2 billion. Well, at least he didn't have to think about it for the next few years. The reason he became a player was because of his identity, and also because he was now the owner of the Grizzlies. The rise of the Grizzlies in recent years was inseparable from him. Sometimes, in an NBA team, it was indeed a very happy thing to have an owner who loved basketball. Whether it was Mark Cuban or Robert Pera, at least they were willing to invest money in the team. Who else is in this Masters competition? After reading Robert Pera's introduction, Jiang Hai elbowed Moses Adams beside him and asked him. Although he didn't know these people, Moses Adams was very familiar with them. Ahem. Did you see the two people in the Eastern Conference coach's seat? Moses Adams asked with a smile when he heard Jiang Hai's doubts. I know those two, Cameron Anthony and Spike Lee. I also watched the live broadcast, okay? Jiang Hai rolled his eyes at Moses Adams. As one of the top superstars in the NBA, how could he not know Anthony and New York's hardcore fan, Spike Lee? You know the Eastern Conference coach, but you definitely don't know the Western Conference coach. The coach over there is the two hosts of ESPN's Mike and Mike program, Mike Ritchie and Mike Grimber. The black man over there is Kevin Hart. He is an actor. He acted in Meet Your Father-in-Law and Scream. Moses Adams smiled awkwardly and immediately introduced the others. Sure enough, other than these two people, Jiang Hai really didn't know the other people. He knew Scream, but he only had some impression of the female lead in the movie. He didn't have any impression of the others, let alone this black man. Anthony is an Anthony. He is also an actor. He also acted in Scream. That is Ansel Elgort. He acted as Witch Carey. Although his acting skills are not good, he is handsome. TSK, that is Chadwick Boseman. He is also an actor, but I guess you haven't seen the movies he acted in? The Indian is Abhishek Bachchan. He is known as the Brad Pitt of Bollywood, but I haven't seen the movies he acted in. I guess you haven't seen them either. There are also some famous players in the NBA. The uncle over there is Chris Mullin. That is Allen Houston. He was once the king of center shooting in New York. There are also some WNBA players. With Moses Adams' introduction, Jiang Hai had a general understanding of these people. Basically, the celebrity game was just a game for fun. No one took it too seriously. Other than celebrities from all walks of life, there were also some retired NBA stars or WNBA stars who needed to increase their popularity. Because of this, there weren't many spectators attending the Masters tournament. The attendance rate barely reached 60%. During the tournament, other than the occasional cheers, there weren't any other cheers. In the end, the Western Conference celebrity team won the game 57-51. Jiang Hai just sat there and watched the fun. Most of the time when he did things he was only passionate about it. Thinking back to when he was watching others play basketball, he went home and built a basketball court. After the basketball court was built, although he would occasionally practice, he didn't pay much attention to it. After all, his physical fitness was there for all to see. As long as he practiced his dribbling well, he would be able to crush anyone in a one-on-one. This was inevitable. He didn't have any plans to enter the NBA, so he just wanted to have fun. Through the fan vote, the final score of the match was 15 points. Alright, out of a total of 57 points, 15 points was indeed a high score that was hard to come by. With 15 points and 2 rebounds, Kevin Hart was selected as the MVP of the Masters tournament for the 4th time in a row. It looked like he was flying as well. As for the participants of the Masters competition, they bowed to the audience and returned to the changing room. Of course, the stadium didn't fall silent. Instead, a cheerleading dance was performed. This time, the NBA All-Star Games cheerleading team consisted of 2 teams. One was the Brooklyn Nets. After all, this was their home court. The other was the New York Knicks. Therefore, in terms of appearance, these girls were quite good. After their dance performance, it was time for the first round of the All-Star Game, the Rookie All-Star Game. Before the rookie competition began, the rookies participating in this year's competition also came to the field to warm up. The seats, which were originally less than 60% full, were also increasing rapidly. Watching celebrities play basketball was definitely not as comfortable as watching official players play basketball, even if these players were only rookies. However, it was hard to say if there were any future all-stars among these rookies. At the same time, the ticket price for the rookie game was much cheaper than the official game. Some people who had time would come to watch. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.